Mr. Huizar or Mr. Weiss, if you would please come to the council chamber so that we can begin the meeting and achieve quorum. It is now 12 after 10 a.m. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Huizar is here. Welcome to Los Angeles City Hall and Los Angeles City Council chambers. This is a meeting of the City of Los Angeles City Council, and today is February the 27th, 2007. Council meets 3 times per week on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and all meetings are open to the public. For those who cannot make it to City Hall, the meetings are televised via cable on Channel 35 or can be viewed by visiting our website. I'd like to call the meeting to order. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Cardenas, Gruel, Hahn, Weezer, Labange, Parks, Perry, Reyes, Rosendahl, Smith, Weiss, Weston, Zine, Garcetti. 10 members present and a quorum, Madam President.
All right, thank you. First item of business
Is approval of the minutes.
Council Member Huizar moves. Mr. Parks seconds.
Commendatory resolutions for approval.
Council Member Zine moves. Council Member Rosendahl seconds.
Madam President, this is Tuesday, and there is a flag salute that is agendized for today's meeting.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to ask Mr. Smith if he would rise and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand. Place your hand over your heart and repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith.
Madam President, do you wish to take a public comment at this time?
I think the best thing to do would be to run through the agenda before taking up public comment.
Okay. Before beginning the agenda, there has been a request to continue item 8 to March 20th.
Moved and approved. Council Member Zine approves. With no objection, move it.
On the regular agenda, items 1 through 5 are confirmation of building and safety liens notice for public hearing. The department reports that items 1 and 2 can be received and filed, and they are recommending on item 3 that the amount be reduced to $8,889.30.
There's no card on this item. No one wishing to speak on this item. Without objection, move it. Oh, I'm sorry. Open the roll, tabulate the vote.
11 ayes.
All right, next item.
Items 6 through 30 are items for which public hearings have been held. Items 6 and 7 are commission appointments. Do you wish to hold those on the desk?
Yes, let's hold those on the desk.
That would leave items 9 through 30.
9 through 30. We do have a number of cards on item 30. We'll hold that one. And otherwise, open the roll. Does anybody want any items called special? Mr. Rosendahl?
Item 21.
Item 21 is called special. Mr. Cardenas?
Item 11.
Mr. Huizar?
25.
Any other items called special? So Mr. Wesson, are you calling any items special? All right. Does that conclude the agenda? Okay, open the roll on the remaining items, please. Close the roll. Tabulate the vote.
11 ayes.
Items 31 through 52 are items for which public hearings have not been held. 10 votes are required for consideration, and there are cards on a number of those items.
Colleagues, are there any items called special? Mr. Cardenas?
Item 32 special for technical amendment, and the technical amendment has been passed out.
Thank you. Mr. Parks?
One, and we'd ask for public hearing, and also if we can take it out of order once the speakers arrive.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Rosendahl.
52 special, please, Madam President.
Thank you. Any other items called special? All right, let's open the roll on the remaining.
Madam President, for the record, there are cards on item 31, 36, just those two.
Yes, call those items special as well. And then open the roll on the remaining items. Close the roll. Tabulate the vote.
11 ayes.
All right.
Items 53 through 55 are the closed session items. Do you wish to hold those on the desk?
Yes, thank you. Without objection.
That would take you back to the beginning of public comment or the items called special.
All right, our first card is Mr. Zumadog.
Yes, nice to be downtown here to see Big Money Griff. I watch him from Van Nuys Public Chambers, my private chambers. Yes, everybody know I did this article on SCAG that was in LA Weekly. Please go online. First of all, Councilmember Labange, thank you for your friendly amendment to get neighborhood councils more involved with SCAG. I have some things posted on Mayor Sam, maybe that could be helpful in educating people. Councilmember Parks, thank you so much for standing up and saying that only 3 out of 15 votes right here are being voted for on SCAG. So what's happening is you're having the smaller cities and unincorporated cities kick LA's butt by being outvoted. So come on, y'all. We need 15 out of 15 to pull against the region. We're getting outvoted by these little rinky-dink cities and unincorporated cities. Thirdly, SCAG says that we need to accommodate for the millions of people coming to town. I say that is not a good thing. We are bursting at the seams right now with high-density projects. So I'd like y'all to stop passing so many high-density projects because the infrastructure can't accommodate the streets, the roads, the schools, the police, the fire, the trash removal, the waste dumps, all these things, because you continue to build high density. We are stuck with this traffic problem. What we have is what we get. You know, it's going to be like New York. We're not going to be able to reduce it. So the point is, where are we going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, based on the decisions that you're approving right now? I'm telling y'all, it's like opening up the ticket window at Wiltern Theater, Ticketmaster, and selling tickets and selling tickets and selling tickets, and now the Wiltern Theater's sold out, and then they're bursting out into the streets and onto the roads, and now the fire marshal has to shut the whole thing down. So the infrastructures cannot accommodate the density that you continue to approve. Now, since the mayor is trying to take over LAUSD and council members are endorsing LAUSD candidates, here's my lineup. Vote for these people: Lamont, Lauritsen, Kaiser, Kleiner, your LAUSD Zumadog starting lineup. Thank
Excuse
you.
me, Madam
City
President. That's
Attorney.
not within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city.
I have to urge all speakers to make sure they stay on the subject matter, and you know, we are not permitted to campaign on city time. The next speaker will be Brenda Wilson. Brenda Wilson.
Good morning, Acting President, Councilwoman Perry, and council members. Linda and I are here today, I guess. Where'd you go, Linda? Anyway, we're very concerned because, as you know, it's only a couple weeks left for the winter shelter program. And I did bring some stats with me. I wonder if I could share these with you that are extremely important. Last year, when the winter shelter ended, New Image, well, we did have assistance with Central Police Station and Newton for the first 2 weeks of the winter shelter, of the year-round program after the winter shelter ended. But every year, it's beyond a nightmare. Before the winter shelter started December the 1st, we were averaging in our 400-bed shelter about 525 and turning away an average of 175 a night. We are here coming before you begging, okay, before the winter shelter program ends, if we could please get some financial assistance so that we can continue the 200-bed that we've added until we can find something more permanent. This is a crucial need, and as you know, the beds go down tremendously from 2,100 beds that are going on now, and well over 2,100 being served, to about 600 beds. and I guarantee you the 2,000 are trying to get into New Image a night. So we need help. I have some stats here that I wanted to share with you. The number of clients, it'd be easier, I think, if you could look at them. Is that possible?
I'm going to ask the Sergeant at Arms to take that, and the Chief CLA desk will distribute to all the council colleagues.
I apologize, there's no New Image name on it, but it's
Okay,
us.
you're almost out of time. Thank you.
Well, Linda's here.
Okay. Our next speaker will be Linda Moran.
So.
Linda Moran, I'm going to allow Ms. Wilson to continue.
Does everybody have the form, though?
The CLA
Okay,
will
if
walk
you look
around.
at
Please
this-
proceed.
Oh,
Yeah.
where is it?
Your time's running, so go ahead and speak.
Oh,
They'll
okay.
get it when they...
Well, if you look at it, the number of clients that were served from March just to May alone was 35,794. We turned away, during that 3-month period, 11,353 homeless.
Yeah.
We served a total during that 3-month period of 47,147. And for those that are turned away, we attempted to give meals to as many of them as we could, but during that 3-month period, 10,276 meals were given to those that we could not house. So, in short, we need help, and we're coming before you now because we're hoping that when the winter shelter program ends on the 15th and the year-round continues, which is only 400 beds, that we can have additional funds to accommodate at least 200 of the more than probably 50,000 that are going to be homeless and on the streets.
Thank you very much, both of you. Our next speaker is Chuck Tenon.
Good morning, council members. Chuck Tenon. I'd like to talk about something that people forget, the catastrophic flood of 1938 that devastated the San Fernando Valley. I'm sure Tom LaBonge, remembering history, will remember it. The LA River, Tujunga Wash, and 14 dams, including Pacoima, overflowed in the granddaddy storm of the century. 11 inches in 5 days and 40,000 cubic feet of water per second resulted in the deaths of 115 people, destroyed 5,601 homes, and damaged 1,500 that were deemed inhabitable. Bridges were destroyed, railroads, schools, streets crippled. As a result of this horrific 1938 flood, U.S. Congress approved the Flood Control Act of 1941 to reshape L.A. County's hydrology into a monolithic system of concrete storm sewers to mitigate the effects of stormwaters and excess drainage. Recently, the front page of the Daily News said $30 million was going to be put forth to improve the drain system and infrastructure. Can it happen again? Yes. The LA River overflowed with death and destruction in 1938, which resulted in the Sepulveda Basin and Hanson Dam being built. A few years ago, we had a record rainfall, 34 inches. 34, 41, and 69, we had problems. There's no storm drain on West Magnolia Boulevard in Valley Village, classified as a secondary highway that is a substandard street, does not meet street requirements to divert and catch excess stormwater during a heavy storm. Many streets in Los Angeles have similar conditions. Do you build rows of condos on a Magnolia Street that has that type of hydrology? Do you build and fix later? Do you require a developer to pay for improvements and infrastructure to make it safe? Yes, you do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tenon. Our next speaker will be Marcia Hanscom.
Honorable Council members, Marcia Hanscom with the Wetlands Action Network and Coastal Law Enforcement Action Network. I have a concern. I live in Playa del Rey, and I have a concern about the neighborhood councils that I would really like you to address. I understand that we have a new director for the Dunn office overseeing neighborhood councils, and this morning we learned that our neighborhood council, Playa del Rey in Westchester, which is largely controlled by large business in the area, the Playa Vista Project, is going to be approving this Thursday two sets of funds, city money, to be given to two of Playa Vista's primary public relation efforts. One of those groups you'll probably see here today. I just saw a lot of them here, PB Jobs, and they have been funded by Playa Vista
City
to
Attorney.
speak for them on numerous occasions. And now this group and their other primary PR group are going to be getting city funds again. Playa Vista has received enough subsidies from this city and from the state of California, and I would hope that you would ask the Neighborhood Council Office to put a process in place. If they're going to be giving money to neighborhood and nonprofit groups, there should be a process where all nonprofit groups are allowed to apply, where there is some sort of semblance of determination how they would comply for these, how they would compete with other groups. Instead, we have two groups who are just being chosen, it looks like to us, by the large majority that Playa Vista has on this neighborhood council. We hope you will look into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And why don't we go to Van Nuys, to Donna Pierman.
Yeah, hi. Oh, hi, Zuma Dog. Anyway, my friend Miriam couldn't be here, so I'm speaking on her behalf. She saw on Channel 5, 35, excuse me, that they want to have it, so we have to have a permit for ammunition. CWW is almost impossible to send them and carry a gun because of a permit. And now you want to make it impossible for people to have ammunition. You're going to disarm the public. The public law-abiding citizens. People can't defend themselves. It won't stop crime. It will be like New York. Nazi Germany took away guns, and you want to disable the gun by making it empty. It's against the Constitution. It's against the Second Amendment. You can't have ammunition by permit. This is not going to change anything. This is not going to make it by making no black market. Black market will be there if there's money be made by drugs, by guns, by illegal guns, illegal ammunition, then they'll do it. Having a permit is not going to change a thing. Matter of fact, it will probably increase it. It will turn it like New York, where they have to have a gun for ammunition or by, and I'm not sure how much time I have. And it's against the Second Amendment sisters would tell you that you can't have a permit for ammunition, then no one will be able to defend themselves. So please don't do this. Garcetti, please don't. And don't take away Zuma Dog's right to speak. Garcetti, thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker in Van Nuys will be Sharon Brewer.
Hi, my name is Sharon Brewer, Lake Balboa Ongoing Concerns. CD6 Councilman Cardenas. For over 3.5 years, you have known about the ongoing problems at Lake Balboa. Illegally parked cars, dogs off leash, illegal fishing, bikes, roller skates, scooters on the walk path, injury to the wildlife. Councilman Cardenas, in over 3.5 years, you have failed to do anything about these problems. Councilman Cardenas, you have ignored my pleas for help with these problems. Councilman Cardenas, you talk about having a safe community, but you have failed to make sure that Lake Balboa Park is a safe place for the public who goes there and the wildlife
Excuse
who
me,
inhabit
Madam
the park.
President. The speaker should speak to the council as a whole. She can refer to the councilman in the third person, but should not be attempting to speak directly to the councilman.
Thank you very much, Mr. City Attorney. Madam, if you heard the City Attorney's comment and admonishment, please proceed.
You have talked about having a CD6. You have talked about is that okay?
City
CD6,
Attorney,
you have
is that
failed.
okay?
She should basically not say you.
CD6 has failed, having failed community, but, this is ridiculous. This applies to a specific CD area, and it's really hard to not go and speak.
Stop the clock, please. City Attorney.
I've already lost a lot of time.
For example, CDX has, and then state what has happened.
Okay, ma'am, please proceed and we'll restart the clock.
Well, I've already lost a lot of time. Anyway, CD6 has done nothing about the problems at Lake Balboa, yet this person is paid over $170,000 a year, and the public needs to know that CD6 is not doing anything. It's not my job to take and provide safety for the park, and I'll be back when I can clean it up.
Madam.
And
Mr. Darien is our next speaker. In Van Nuys, Bruce Darien, our next speaker.
Morning, City Council. Wanted to thank the Academy for recognizing Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth on the documentary on global warming, and would like to expand on that a little bit here in the region. I'll read a part of a press release which I'll supply the Council with copies of. Las Virgenes Triunfo Municipal Water District applied and was granted a permit to discharge to Malibu Creek in 1984. Before 1984, Las Virgenes Triunfo was never allowed to discharge to Malibu Creek. The permits that were issued to Las Virgenes by the United States EPA were issued with regulations. Both the water quality and quantity of water discharged to Malibu Creek has irrefutably and irreparably destroyed a truly one-of-a-kind natural resource at Malibu Point. The massive amounts of unnatural treated effluent which are discharged on a daily basis to Malibu Creek has shifted the natural contour of the beach.
Excuse me, Madam President, this is a matter that's outside the jurisdiction of the city.
Mr. Darien, if you could please confine your comments to jurisdictional matters within the city limits. Please proceed.
Okay. Did you hold my time there? Okay. The massive amounts of unnatural treated effluent which is discharged on a daily basis to Malibu Creek and or discharged to the Los Angeles River has shifted the natural contour of the beach, as it does at Malibu and I'm sure as it does in San Pedro. The Malibu Point, 3 to be exact, was formed over millions of years from the natural flow of Malibu Canyon. The contours of the 3 points have been changed because of the continual dumping of sediment as a direct result of the effluent being discharged to the creek and Los Angeles River. The complex issues that plague Malibu Beach and the pier involve every jurisdiction of the government, which is undeniable. What is undeniable is the fact that the laws have been continually violated both in terms of safeguarding the environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darien. Now back to City Hall. Our next speaker will be Morris Big Money Griffin. Mr. Griffin is our next speaker, please.
Zuma Dog, it's good to see you in the flesh. Madam President, members of the City Council, this is my 4th time here. Let me start off by saying Connie Rice was here a month ago. She brought us a wonderful proposal, as thick as a telephone book, but yet we have been dragging our feet. I'm asking you, I'm pleading to you, bring Connie Rice back to the table. We are tired of these senseless killings. Men, women, children, and babies. We've got to bring Connie back to the table so that we can begin the process of negotiating in regards to helping us help each other when it comes to gang violence. I only have a minute here. But again, I'm here. What will it take? We're dragging our feet. I want to see, before I go to my grave, residents of Los Angeles, instant thousandaires and instant millionaires with my ethnic lotto. Will you please allow us to put this on the ballot so that one person from every ethnic race can have a chance to win twice a week for the rest of our lives as long as we reside in the city of Los Angeles? Here we are, the 2nd month in 2007. We are the 2nd largest city in the United States of America. When will we ever learn? When will we come to grips to understanding that there's a better way in which we can live and coexist amongst ourselves? So I'm asking you, please put ethnic lotto on the ballot so that we can become instant thousandaires and instant millionaires for the rest of our lives as long as we reside in the city and the county of LA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Arnold Sachs. Mr. Arnold Sachs is our next speaker.
Good morning, council members. A few comments to make. First, there were some articles in the newspaper. Last week I spoke about the mayor's plan for hiring 1,000 more police officers, and then there was an article in the newspaper regarding the standings of the police department. Right now, as of January of this year, there's 9,475 officers, according to the article. The mayor wants 10,000 within 5 years. There was a problem with the deferred retirement plan that was begun in 2002, which allowed officers to stay on for more years past their retirement date. But prior to that, what was the plan that, in effect when these seasoned officers were going to be forced to retire within the years prior to 2007? Also, there was a problem with the numbers of officers hired. There were 360 approved for 2002-2003, but 672 were hired. Basically, the police department needed 1,674 officers within a 5-year period, and they only hired 1,300 within the fiscal years, but they refused. They did include the 362 that were over the number budgeted. So basically, they needed 1,674. They hired 1,672. Enough of that. Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about the DWP and the mess that's come up with their contract. Please, how many people in this audience would work for time and a half versus regular time over their 40-hour work week? I'm not too concerned about that. Well, I'm more concerned about the city attorney or the attorney for the city that approved the contract that allowed the DWP not only to get an expansive pay raise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sachs. Our next speaker will be Sylvia Lynn Hawkins.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ms. Hawkins. This note is from your president and vice president. This is directed to all committees, airplane pilots, City Hall of Los Angeles Committee Plan Board. We are asking all public people, private people, to be very cautious if traveling at this time. In any location but the 50 states, in the 50 states. 8 states must stand still. Also in the 50 states, for 1 year and 2 months. Any other traveling is at this time at your own risk. Please be patient. We are in the middle of planning of dismissing all other airports, airplanes, closing Tom Bradley Airport, detail work with borderline passports, trading protection for only the 58 states of public people and Hawkeye 8 military. We must be very cautious if we are traveling and we are private people and then we are not officials, because now they are throwing not just mist on the food but on the people, whether it's in Santa Monica or downtown Los Angeles. Again, we're asking all public people to stand by and be very cautious. In traveling over the one divided line, we have made a borderline, which is then disrespected by public people that are not born here. Their country is in other countries.
She
and now
appears to
they're coming up
have
missing.
veered off topic.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hawkins. You've veered off topic now. Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Mr. Fuentes. I can't read the first name. You have 3 seconds, and you have veered off topic, and your time has now elapsed. Thank you very much. Our Mr. Fuentes is our next speaker. Mr. Fuentes, please proceed.
Too quiet up in here. It's gonna be a war. We got
Good morning, Councilmember Perry and the other council members. In 1999, the Information Technology Agency began taking steps to renew the cable television franchises, which were going to expire in 2002. In 2002, ITA's general manager told the city, recommended that the city extend these franchises for 2 more years until 2004. 2004 came and went, no franchises were renewed. In 2005, the city controller issued critical reports of ITA and its franchising practices. Shortly after those reports were issued, ITA hired Ken Simmons as an executive director to take care of franchising. Well, franchises were not renewed, state law changed, and the city has not obtained the benefits of renewed cable franchises, unlikely that they ever will. Now, ITA apparently is not content with wasting all the money that, and hundreds of thousands of dollars that went into consultants and attorneys in a franchise renewal process that never led anywhere. So now they've entered into a couple of contracts, one on PEG access and one on customer service audits. Now, much of the work in these contracts should be handled in-house by ITA staff. Now, if ITA staff can't handle these contracts, then they should be replaced with competent staff that can. So I'm asking this city council, and I'm asking the controller of this city to look at these contracts, which could cost the city up to over $700,000 according to the terms. Look at these contracts and let's spend city money wisely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fuentes. Next speaker will be Hannah Yoon. Hannah Yoon. It appears that Ms. Yoon is not in the chamber, so our next speaker will be John Lee. Mr. John Lee. Appears that Mr. Lee is not in the chamber. Madam, or Mr. Clerk, that will close public comment, and there has been a request by Council Member Parks to take item 51. Are you waiting a few more? All right, fine. All right, well, we'll take the commissioners first then.
Item 6 is the appointment of Mr. Victor De La Cruz to the Relocation Appeals Board.
Mr. Cruz.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Cruz. Mr. Wesson, are you rising to speak on his behalf as committee chair? Yes.
This morning in committee, we had the opportunity to have a long chat with Victor De La Cruz, and we had an opportunity to meet his mother. We had an opportunity to hear his qualifications, his training, and the committee unanimously recommended that this council approve his appointment. I anticipate that we will see very good things from this Yale-educated young man.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wesson. There are no further speakers in the queue. Before we take our vote, is there anything you'd like to say on the record?
Just wanted to thank you all for having me here, and I look forward to serving on this commission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cruz. Mr. Clerk, would you please open the roll? Close the roll. Tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
May I have the next order of business?
Item 7 is the appointment of Mr. Luis Lopez to the East Los Angeles Area Planning Commission.
Mr. Lopez, would you please come to the center table? Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, Mr. Lopez.
Morning.
Welcome to City Hall. I just wanted to ask you if you can just share with the council some of your main objectives as a participant in this role in the Area Planning Commission.
Well, I look forward to serving on this commission. I've had the privilege of serving on the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council as a former co-chair, and so I've been very active and been monitoring a lot of land use planning issues, and so I look forward to also serving in that capacity on the East Area Planning Commission.
Just one question in regards to the planning process and engagement of our stakeholders in our communities. we all know there's a real crunch being felt by mostly all the citizens of Los Angeles because of the lack of housing. Creating accessible housing, creating housing for folks of all income groups. What's your perspective on that, and what skills? So you have a very, and I want to congratulate you as a Harvard graduate, but I also know that you've had a lot of experience in finance and looking at the money side of this equation. Can you just speak to that in terms of how we can approach that issue and just generalities?
Sure. Well, I think housing, as we all know, is we have a scarcity of housing, and I think we need to think about creative ways to make sure that we ensure that all income groups have access to housing. And so I think it's going to require some sacrifice and some creative thinking to find an appropriate balance to do that.
Well, I appreciate your time. I know it's a volunteer role, so one of the highest paid individuals on the city family, but I do want to thank you for your commitment, the role model that you are for many of the folks in our city, and I look forward to working with you in some of these challenges we have ahead of us. So congratulations. Prematurely perhaps, but I just want to ask everyone for an aye vote as a participant of this commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Mr. Huizar.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your willingness to serve. You know, the northeast part of Los Angeles, which this commission will cover, has some very interesting neighborhoods, particularly in the hillsides, where recently we just passed an interim control ordinance to protect the hillsides, to protect from overdevelopment in some areas that have some very narrow roads. We're concerned about safety. We're concerned about emergency vehicles coming up to access those areas in the event of an emergency. And just wanted to point that out to you and just make you aware as you move forward. I served on the East Area Planning Commission years ago, and not being from some of those neighborhoods, not really traveling up to those neighborhoods, and some of those projects would come before us, wasn't really aware of the need to continue to move forward to preserve or not create any danger by allowing over-concentration in those areas. Just wanted to make you aware of that, and thank you for your willingness to serve. And Yale was mentioned, Harvard was mentioned. I wanted to make sure that my alma mater is mentioned here too, Princeton. So thank you.
Mr. Labange.
Luis, good to see you. Good to see you again. Thank you for your work on previously on the Neighborhood Council. And I think having that experience helps you be a better commissioner, trying to balance the needs out. What do you see if you just vision the area? What do you see it in 10 years, 20 years?
I see an area that continues to be vibrant, economically, socially, culturally. I think ethnically, certainly. And I think that transportation is going to continue to be a major challenge. I think that as we continue to look at planning public transportation in closer to home so that people are encouraged to use public transportation, I think that's really what we need to be planning for.
And how much development can these older neighborhoods handle? A follow-up to Mr. Huizar's questions.
Well, certainly I think that parking always needs to be taken into consideration, so we can't overdevelop to an extent where people can't drive out of their homes and into thoroughfares. So certainly there's a balance, but I think that we need to keep in mind the potential in terms of good planning and looking towards a vibrant and socio-economically diverse city.
Well, you said all the right things, and I think your experience as a neighborhood leader, your involvement, and just knowing and visualizing the community, this is what people want. They want that, and try to balance it out so it doesn't overconsume them, so they don't feel that they have a very special neighborhood. And the neighborhoods in this part of Los Angeles are as nice as any neighborhoods in the city of Los Angeles, with exception of those in San Pedro May, the view of the Catalina Island. Thank you, Luis, for your leadership here, and balance it out. Just balance it out and engage and empower. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Labange. Ms. Hahn.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I certainly rise to support you, and I think you, again, bring a great experience with neighborhood councils, and I don't see Dennis around here right now, but, you know, it was on our Charter Reform Commission that we envisioned these two entities, neighborhood councils and area planning commissions. They did not exist before our new charter in 1999. And this is exactly what we believed would help Los Angeles, and particularly all the stakeholders in Los Angeles, have a real voice in our future planning and development. Maybe you could speak to what do you think the relationship is between neighborhood councils and our area planning commissions, and how they could work together better in the future to really build neighborhoods that work for everybody?
Well, I think as it relates to neighborhood councils, we need to continue to ensure that there's plenty of opportunity for residents to be involved. We need to continue to look at those reform measures so that they're truly inclusive. We ensure that there's ample opportunity to participate, because until we ensure that is the case, we're not going to have all the necessary voices that we need for commissions like the Area Planning Commission. So I think it's an excellent component to the system, because I think we're going to need that voice and that information from the neighborhood councils.
And I would just always ask that you reach out before decisions are made and make sure that neighborhood councils have an opportunity to weigh in on the area planning commissions. Usually the commission will ask what's the view of the city council member when there's a decision, but I just would urge you to make sure that you've given enough notice to the area neighborhood council so that they can weigh in on the decisions that you make. I think you'll be a fine commissioner, and I really want to thank you for the willingness to serve. People need to remember that you're all just citizens, volunteers, trying to make the process of planning and development in the city of Los Angeles work better for everyone. So thank you for that, and you got my vote.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. There are no further speakers in the queue, so Mr. Clerk, if you would please open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
Congratulations, sir. Thank you. Our next order of business will be item 52. Item 52 we'll now take up.
And that was called special by Councilmember Rosendahl.
Mr. Rosendahl. Mr. Rosendahl, if you would proceed.
Appreciate that, Madam President. Today we're declaring Elizabeth Taylor Day. Elizabeth Taylor will be 75 years old today, and she's been a true leader in dealing with AIDS awareness, research, and therapies. In the 80s, when no one wanted to talk about AIDS because it was one of these dark secrets, Elizabeth Taylor, an Oscar-winning celebrity, was out there speaking about it and creating awareness. Today she's 75 years old, and we want to honor her by making today Elizabeth Taylor Day. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl. We do have one speaker card on this item. Mr. Jed Kensley.
Good morning. My name is Jed Kensla, and I'm a resident of North Hollywood. I want to thank Councilmember Rosendahl for introducing this resolution, and I'm here speaking on behalf of AIDS Healthcare Foundation and countless other AIDS organizations the world over. I want to thank you for seriously considering Councilmember Rosendahl's resolution to proclaim today Elizabeth Taylor Day. You could probably justify considering such a motion based solely on Ms. Taylor's legendary film career and the reflected glory that the city of Los Angeles has basked in as a result of that. I'm actually here to speak with regard to her work on HIV/AIDS the world over. I have seen firsthand her work, the contributions that she has made. As Councilmember Rosendahl said, she took up this with the ferocity, with the compassion, with the commitment when people were terrified of this issue. So for that, we applaud and salute her, and I would also urge you to very seriously consider endorsing this resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. There are no speakers in the queue. So, Mr. City Clerk, if you would please open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
All right, our next order of business will be
Elizabeth Taylor.
item 51, Mr. Parks. All right, we have a few. Okay, Mr. Parks. If not, I think we'll go straight to the speaker cards to start. Actually, ma'am, if you have you filled out speaker cards, the ladies at the podium?
Yes.
I will call you in just a minute. If you can just have a seat, I'll call you in just a second. All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant Arms.
Ms. Cole, perhaps while we're... Okay, great. Mr. Parks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd ask that we start a public hearing by asking those who have put cards in to come up to the podium. Mr. Kinsey, Mrs. Cole, Jackie Ryan, if we can get you up here. And also, there may be other speakers that have put cards in. Big Money has, I think, put a card in, and others may be forthcoming. But I think it's important to, first of all, set the tone that what we're here today is to talk about whether the City of LA should go on record in support of federal legislation that has been put forward by Mr. John Conyers that talks about creating an institute to study the issue of reparations in the United States. And one of the documents that probably has done one of the better studies in locally is our weekly newspaper that put out in their document that talks about the ongoing process that this country has gone through. We've honored people in this chambers that has dealt with anything from the Rwandan genocide of 1 million people being lost in a month to just last week talking about or honoring people to acknowledge the Armenian genocide that is still being debated. We go through in this community and throughout this country the acknowledgement of the Holocaust. In fact, there are many events that's coming up in this city in which the atrocities there of losing 6 million people. And then we know clearly throughout this country that there have been reparations or discussions or conclusions made about the issue of Indians, Native Americans, in which have been well publicized. Also the issue of well publicized as it relates to Alaska and how Eskimos were handled and how they were dealt with the atrocities there. And then we could go out of this country and see what Germany and Austria have come forward and how they have addressed the issue of dealing with the Holocaust. What's interesting about this subject is that if we talk about the African genocide, the African slavery, there are probably more people lost in the slave trade of transportation and eventually lost in slavery than many of these other atrocities combined. And yet, if we go back and look at the billions of dollars that have been dealt with in reparations, we find that the only group that has never received 1 penny since 1600, when slavery began, has been Africans, African Americans, or black, depending on how you put them in what category. And so this is something I think it's important. This city has taken a leadership role, whether we're talking about issues of extracting our money out of companies that deal with Burma, or just recently dealing with the issue of the Sudan, and a variety of things that we've been on the forefront. This is another step for us to be on the forefront on a very important issue. And let me ask Ms. Cole, who's the publisher, CEO of our weekly newspaper, to start the public comment.
Good morning, City Council. Beg your pardon. Good morning. Well, first of all, I've been asked to limit my comments.
Can you identify who you are, please, as you come forward?
My name is Natalie Cole.
Thank you.
I have been asked to limit my comments to about 2 minutes, and considering the complexity of the subject matter at hand, slavery and reparations, I'm sure you will appreciate the difficulty in kind of summing up and broad stroking such a statement in a 2-minute time frame, but here we are. We are an intellectual world power, and regularly we exert our influence across the globe. As a country, briefly in the 50s, we helped to rebuild war-torn Europe and Japan, setting the stage for each of them to become the economic world powers or superpowers that they are today. In the 60s, we were shifting our weight in Southeast Asia, and currently, we're helping the Middle East to embrace democracy. Yet finding resolve, if there's such a thing, to a long-festering domestic concern involving the casualties of slavery have thus far proven elusive. The majority of people throughout the world would agree that the institution of slavery was unjust to those enslaved, and logically, what we as a people do to respond to things that are unfair or unjust is to make adjustments, to give balance, or to bring whatever that is back into alignment, if you will. But first, you must recognize that something is wrong and needs fixing. And only then can you evaluate the alternate options to make those corrections or adjustments. So in answering the question of whether or not the City Council should support a commission to study the effects of slavery and make recommendations on reparations, I say yes. In closing, I leave you with two critical questions to ponder. Is it possible that the institution of slavery, in effect, altered the normal course of evolution of the institution of the black family? And is it also possible that due to the brutality of slavery, descendants continue to struggle to recover from what has been coined a slave mentality, which is characterized by post-traumatic stress syndrome, among other things, which has ultimately been a burden to society? I implore you, please support Bill H.R. 40. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Councilmember Jan Perry.
Mr. Zine, and I pressed my button. I guess there's a malfunction this morning. This recommendation or proposal by Congressman Conyers has originally hatched two decades ago, and it is the first time we've been able to advance this cause. Other cities, such as Chicago and New York, have already passed resolutions in support of the bill. This is a bill, again, to establish a commission to study the issue. I pulled an article from New America Media just to give some idea as to why this is relevant and important. The position of the article is that U.S. government, not the planters, bear the blame for slavery, given the constitutional amendments, given the classification as a slave of African descent as 3/5 of a person for purposes of political representation, and that protected and nourished it in Article 4 by mandating that escaped slaves found anywhere in the nation be returned to their masters. Major institutions profited from slavery: the insurance industry, banks, shipping companies, investment houses. That is why we have put so many resolutions forward on divestment. The legacy of slavery endures. It's well documented by the level of violence, the level of disparity in the communities that we represent. The Federal Reserve Board, one of the members estimated that discrimination against people of African descent continues to occur, and the black-white wage gap, denial of capital access continues to be highly disparate and a significant problem. The concern that it may fuel dislike of a particular ethnic group, we have a good precedent already, as Mr. Parks has put before you today, and there has been no legislation at this point to mandate that taxpayers pay billions to any particular African American group. This is a commission bill to study the issue, and I hope that we can move forward on this today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Perry. We'll go back to the public speaker. Sir, identify yourself, please.
Bernard Kinsey. I want to thank Councilman Parks for the opportunity to speak this morning, and each of you, particularly Councilman Perry, for your comment just a few minutes ago. The council has a great history of supporting and being leaders in so many areas. I've been in this city 40 years. You took on South Africa, immigration, the working poor, El Salvador, the Holocaust. I mean, and almost any other injustice that needed to be spoken to, you did it. And I think this is one, it's time that we deal with it. There really are 4 reasons that we really need to study history. And I want to go on this because without understanding history, we are dealing with his story. And most of us that went to high school always got his story, which never dealt with what really happened in this country as it relates to black people and the change and the development of this country into a great power. The first reason we should study history is simply to be best prepared to reward our research. Secondly, we should study history to absorb its spirit of human possibility. And then secondly, that's what Marcus Garvey meant when he said, what humans have done, humans can do. Third, we study history to extract and emulate as models of human excellence and achievement. That's what Mary McLeod Bethune means when she said, we are heirs and custodians of a great legacy, and we must bear the burden and the glory of that legacy with strength, dignity, and determination. And finally, of course, we study history to observe and practice the morality of remembrance, and that's part of what this resolution is trying to do. This is what Fannie Lou Hamer means when she said there are only two things we should all care about: never forget where we came from, and always praise the bridges that we came across. So I want to ask this council to continue its leadership in this area of being one of the first in this country to always speak out against injustice. And this 800-pound gorilla called slavery is never going to go away until America addresses it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, identify yourself, please.
I am Jackie Ryan from Lamert Park, and good morning, City Council. I rise to join the many assembled here to urge passage of the City Council resolution in support of H.R. 40, the Commission to Study Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. This act is an important and straightforward one, which seeks to achieve three modest but essential goals. One, to acknowledge the morally and monstrous and massive destruction of African life, cultures, and possibilities through the brutal and inhumane process and system of enslavement described in various ways as genocide and a crime against humanity. Number two, to examine the nature and function of such a savage and unjust system and its successive system of segregation and racial and economic discrimination and its impact on African Americans. Three, to make recommendations to the Congress concerning appropriate remedies of repair. There's a well-established policy on international and national level of reparations, which involves taking appropriate steps to understand and repair the gross historical and ongoing injuries and damages done to people. Usually this includes various forms: investigations, determinations, negotiations, and compensation. Congressional Resolution H.R. 40 does not address this issue in all its complexities. It merely asks for a study of the nature and extent of the injury and lingering legacy and recommendations to address these issues. 2 seconds. Again, I strongly urge the adoption of this council resolution, not only for African Americans, the people addressed, but also in the interest of justice as a fundamental principle and practice of the City of Los Angeles, which is in the interest of everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker.
Good morning, Mr. President and Council, City Council members. I'm Opal Young. I am a member of Reparation United Front. That is a reparation organization that has been in touch with reparations for the past 6 or 7 years. I just want to say that the Reparation United Front of Southern California strongly support Councilman Park's resolution for the City of Los Angeles to stand behind U.S. Congressman John Conyers' H.R. 40 bill, which we fully expect to get the congressional hearing and debate in the coming months of 2007. I am a descendant of slavery.
Thank you.
Good morning, honorable City Council members. My name is Thalia Clark, and I am also a member of Reparations United Front. Going beyond that support, however, the Reparations United Front strongly urges the councilman and the City of Los Angeles to establish as soon as possible a commission to study the impact of slavery and former slaves on the history and evolution of the City of Los Angeles and Southern California. There is a clear need for such a commission, which could be formed almost immediately from the immense base of academic and community talent which currently exists in and around Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye.
And your name, sir?
I'm Morris Griffin, better known as Big Money Griff, strong community activist and leader. I'm also the chairperson of INCREW, which is the National Coalition for Reparations and Economic Wealth. First and foremost, I would like to thank Councilman Parks, Councilman Wesson, Councilwoman Perry for being in the forefront in Black History Month to request this resolution in the H.R. 40 reparations study bill. I can't emphasize enough, it's a study bill. So anybody who stands up here and denies or tries to say that we shouldn't have a study bill because it's divisive is wrong, and we have to look at their politics. We have to look at their attitude and behavior. We have to look at how we're not being respected and not being recognized. America has never apologized for slavery. America has never even addressed the issue of slavery. So I'm asking you to pass this resolution in unison. And I would like to say this. As Black African Americans, we deserve our fair share. Help us to begin the process of resolving this by having a study. We need to investigate these companies. We need to investigate the damages, whether psychologically, politically, emotionally, physically, as a result of losing our name, our language, and our culture. And so it goes with me saying, how long? How many more years? If not now, then when? Show me, City Council, that you are about something in the 21st century, the 7th year in the 21st century. Thank you all.
Thank you. Councilmember Wesson.
Allow the
Public speaker?
public speakers to continue, and I could speak after them.
Okay,
Thank
fine.
you.
Thank you. Sir, identify yourself, please.
Hello, my name is Glenn Marzano from Marina Del Rey. I'm here as a lone person to discuss and try to persuade the council to vote against this measure. I do believe that this is a divisive measure that can only do harm to separate and cause more animosity between the races. Slavery was well over 100 years ago. In my family, along with many others who arrived to this great country after the 1900s, had nothing to do with slavery. And as far as reparations go, there's been billions of dollars spent out since the 1960s, and also through affirmative action, the United States has tried to make amends for this action of slavery, which was terrible. And please, if you don't try to paint me as a racist, because I'm far from it, I just believe this is a divisive issue that should be voted against. Not that slavery shouldn't be studied, because it should, because it was a very black mark on our history. Thank you.
Thank you. There's two more public speakers, Alex Davis here, and Mr. Danny Bakewell. Okay, that's the concluding the list of public speakers. Mr. Wesson.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. One of the individuals from the public stated that this was a study bill, and I want to reaffirm that that is exactly what it is. And for people that kind of wonder why, after so many years, I say that the answer is that it is important to us, not as African Americans, it is important to us as human beings. I had the opportunity not too long ago to read the first book that was written by Barack Obama, where it talked about his father hailing from Kenya. And I found myself truly envious because I couldn't trace my roots after my grandfather's father. Then, shortly thereafter, I took some kind of a DNA test, and I found out that I was a descendant of Sierra Leone, that individuals from that region, that maybe hundreds of years ago, that's where my ancestors came from. And it made me feel really good that I could connect with the region of Africa where I had come from. But before that, African Americans, we were descendants of those who refused to die. And what I mean by that, when they brought our ancestors over here in the black belly of that ship, a third of the members, the slaves on that ship, during the exercise portion, because they wanted to keep us in shape so that they could sell us when we got to the States, a third of those people jumped overboard and committed suicide because they didn't know what the future had for them, and they were afraid of that. Another third of the slaves that were on that ship, they literally willed themselves to death. Chained together like sardines, they just willed themselves to death. But we, as African Americans, were proud. We were proud because we were the descendants of the last third. Those were the third of the people who refused to die. So I was proud to tell individuals, I can't tell you where I was from, but I am a proud descendant of those who refused to die. That's why Mr. Parks is here. That's why Ms. Perry's here. That's why I'm here. This is a study. This is a discussion about one of the most horrific times in the history of this great country. This debate should take place. This study is important, not just for us as African Americans, but for us as of human beings. And I know there might be some that could say, well, you know, you weren't even alive then. There's nobody alive today. This is not like what happened with the Japanese or what happened where it relates to Holocaust survivors. No, it is not. But it is not that far, it's not that much different. This is important. This is important, and I would expect every member of this council to vote aye on this measure. It is a bill to study. It is a bill to discuss. It is a bill to apologize. It is a bill to make things right. I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Wesson. Ms. Hahn. Chair Hahn.
Hey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I stand in complete support of the second largest city in the United States going on record supporting H.R. 40 to support this commission to study, as you said. And Mr. Wesson, that was a very moving speech that you just gave, a very moving speech. And I know for many of the people that I represent in the 15th Council District, they would also believe that the time has come for us to take this step, to have this commission study. And it is about justice, as many of the speakers said. It is about justice. This was one of, in my opinion, one of the most horrible times in this country, and something that we cannot move forward without really paying attention to what slavery meant, what slavery has done to not only the descendants of those one-third that did commit to live, but what slavery really has done for the rest of this country. And for us to not, at this point, go forward with studying what the effects has been is wrong, and it would be shameful for us to not take this opportunity now to take the step. And I was proud of the state that just officially apologized. Was that Virginia? That stood up and apologized for their role in slavery, and we should all do that now. And I hope this commission doesn't just study, but I hope this commission comes back with recommendations that we make reparations in a significant way to all the descendants of those who were brutally entrapped in slavery. And I don't think we'll ever know the effects. I don't think we'll ever be able to study what that really has meant for the descendants, and unfortunately for many who have not made it until this day. But we should all be ashamed of that part of the history of this country. We should all be ready to apologize, and I hope that this commission comes back and recommends that reparations be made to all the descendants of this terrible part of our history, which was slavery. So thank you, members, for bringing this forward to us. I am proud to go on record today supporting this with my aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Councilmember Cardenas. Tony Cardenas.
Thank you very much. Just gathering my thoughts at this moment in time, I'm thinking very much about what our country is and what our country is about. Yet at the same time, we're a country of history. And we believe as Americans today that we are the most equal country in the world when it comes to treating people as equals. Yet at the same time, our country that we're so proud of actually condoned, participated, and was about slavery freely, actively, and that slavery suppressed and even killed individuals. The worst thing that you can do to a person, the worst thing that you can do to a community, worse than sticking a dagger in someone's heart so that they may bleed to death, is the description that my colleague Herb Wesson just mentioned earlier, where people in a certain community actually willed themselves to death. They would rather expire, they would rather know that they have given up on their life rather than live the life that was going to be forced on them. That's called slavery. That's what slavery does. Slavery saps the life out of people. It hinders and hurts a community, a family, a person to the deepest core. I think it's important for us as Americans not to just say that, well, it happened, that was then, that is not now. Unless we heal ourselves as a country, unless we're willing to look in the mirror and say, this is who we were, we cannot honestly say that that is not who we are, unless we properly put to rest that history. I think it's important for the city of Los Angeles, the second largest city in this great country, to stand and say that reparations are in fact part of that healing, that reparations are a part of who we should be today for what we were at one time. To engage in activity, to condone activity, to allow that the laws of this land would allow us to suppress, to enslave people to the point that they will themselves to death is something that we need to reckon with. It's something that we as a country, we need to bring closure to as best we can as human beings. I think the city of Los Angeles, appropriately so, should stand and ask Washington, ask Congress to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Labange.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cardenas. Thank you, Mr. Cardenas, Ms. Hahn, Mr. Wesson, for your remarks, which were quite moving, Ms. Perry, and Mr. Parks, for your leadership. Wouldn't you love to turn back the clock and change a lot of things of our history that we know today as we stand and breathe were wrong? But we can't turn back the clock, but we could correct the clock. We could correct the clock by supporting this measure. And hopefully across the country support this measure. because I remember as a deputy here when the discussion was about Japanese internment, and it was a fight, and to see the chambers filled with people who lived at First and San Pedro Street who were taken from their houses, taken from their homes, their businesses, and shipped to internment camps around the country. And then the struggle took place in the discussion and the yays and the nays, and then finally Ronald Reagan signed the bill that caused that to be corrected historically. And I think that's one thing that's amazing about our country, is that we as people, if we together stand and have the opportunity to correct, not to change history, not to turn about and say things that weren't true, but to correct the hearts of people. Because how much sadness does one have? And Herb, when you're talking, I'm thinking about a young Herb sitting around listening to the older members of your family talking about life, and repeat it from their families and their elders, and how now of many, many years, how important it is to finally try to put it on the table, so there'll be light on the table, so that people will know. And time does go by so fast and so long, but if you don't stand up and correct the opportunity that we have here in this country, then we miss the opportunity to do the right thing. So I want to stand to support this measure and call on not just this city council, but all city councils across this great country to support this measure. Thank you very much.
Mr. Rosendahl.
Thank you, Mr. President. For those watching this, know that we're talking about supporting House Bill 40, the Commission to Study Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. By approving this, the Council is acknowledging the fundamental injustice, cruelty, and inhumanity of slavery in the United States and the 13 American colonies between 1619 and 1865. I will establish a commission to examine the institution of slavery and the impact of this on African Americans, and to make recommendations to the Congress on appropriate remedies. That's the bill, folks. It's a no-brainer for me. My parents were immigrants from Germany, so we don't share in the blood that took place historically at that particular moment. They came here for a better life. They left Germany during the midst of a turmoil for freedom, as does everybody else. But the only group that came here that wasn't coming here for that, were dragged out of their homes, put on boats, and brought over here, were Africans. Africans who then became Americans. And it took Abe Lincoln and the Civil War for us finally to say that all men and women are created equal, and all have dignity and must be respected. We talk about genocide every day here. We had the Armenians here in 1915 were genocide. We have the Jews through the insanity of Hitler in World War II. And right now we have Darfur going on in south part of the Sudan. But a big genocide that will always be a mark on America is the genocide done to Africans as they came here. And I dare say today, the African-American community is continually onslaughted, be it AIDS, be it some of the issues of gangs, be it the criminal justice system and how that impacts them. African Americans are not completely free today, and I look forward to that day, and I look forward to all of us getting on ourselves here and making it a better world. Thank you all. Support the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl. Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Council President. I just stand on behalf of all the youngsters in our jails, in our institutions, that without this bill won't ever learn about what truly happened in the past. I think for our future generations, we talk about issues of self-esteem, talk about identity. We need to understand the facts for what they are, that there's a cause and effect, and the ripples of those actions to this day we still feel. So understanding that history is crucial. How we approach it in our grammar schools, in our high schools, is critical to the understanding of this notion of self and identity. And that's something we need to improve upon for future generations. So on that premise alone, I believe we should understand what that impact is, how it's been felt, what we can do to change, what structurally this country has done to take advantage of those who were weakened by this institution known as slavery. So I thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Parks, the final speaker, but Mr. Bakewell, you've shown up. We called your name earlier. It's your turn. Mr. Danny Bakewell.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the City Council. Thank you so much for waiting for me. Let me thank Councilman Parks for bringing this issue forward. And the few that I've heard, and I understand that we're hoping that this is going to be a unanimous issue that is before you. This is very important because, as Councilman Rosenthal so adequately said, African Americans, even to this day, are not free because there are so many issues that confront us that are reflective of the treatment that our ancestors encountered through slavery. Many of us witnessed Katrina and the horrible aftermath of that, seeing people ravaged by a storm, left to fend for themselves. If you can just let your mind wander and realize that even as bad as Katrina was, people knew that there would be a tomorrow, that they had some possibility of seeing their children, their loved ones, their husbands, their wives, even though that may not have happened. In slavery, people were separated from their children, their wives, their family members with no conceivable hope that they would ever see them again. That love was just torn from their very being, and they merely had to grapple with it. Slavery happened to us for literally hundreds of years. And there was nothing that we could do about it. There was nobody that was trying to give us justice. We've been working with Congressman Conyers on this bill. We thank you for taking it up. But we want you to understand, we have been an anchor, a pillar for everybody in this country to find justice for them. We have cried for them. We have mourned for them. We have had empathy for them. We are saying to you, as African American people, as people of goodwill, who cries for us? This is an opportunity for you to be on the record that you have compassion, you have concern, you have a real belief that African Americans deserve justice, even though it's generations that have passed before we got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bakewell. Mr. Parks.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to thank all of those from the community that came today. Also want to thank all my colleagues that commented on this issue. I just would like to make a couple of wrap-up comments. I think the motion that went forward more than adequately identifies what the issues are. When we talk about the number of people that were enslaved, when we talk about the number of people that have died while enslavement, the number of lynchings, and for those who say it happened a long time ago and I didn't have a role in it, I think the concern is that many of us today did not have a role in many things that happened in the past, yet we are responsible for them. And I think also that when we think about, as Mr. Bakewell said, you don't ever recover from the loss of a family member, the selling of a son or a daughter. You don't ever recover from a lynching of an uncle. You don't ever recover from those circumstances just by time. And anyone that has experienced that would understand what I mean, whether you lose a loved one in a gang violence or you lost a loved one to a lynching, or the issue that we had in Texas a while back where they just drug a person until he disintegrated in the middle of the street. And so those are things I think we must think about. And just as we have learned from the Jewish community that says the Holocaust is the issue that we must never forget about, is because they don't want to relive that history. And the fact that when we talk about the Armenian genocide, in which the Turkish community doesn't even acknowledge existed, that is something that you can't ignore because you could repeat those circumstances. We don't want in this city, in this country, to ever have in our Constitution that individuals are property. individuals can't vote. It's illegal for people to be educated. That's what this is about in the study. And to say we have overcome this and time has passed, it'd be like saying that we've had a 400-year race, and in that race, you've shackled a group of people, and then you gave them a used pair of Nikes 400 years later and say, catch up. It doesn't happen. And so I think it's important that we as people clearly remind those every day of the week that slavery was part of this country. It was written in the Constitution. It's something that we overcome by understanding the limitations and the negative part, but we never forget it, because there are people who are not here because of slavery. There are people whose communities, their families are not here to be counted because of slavery. There are people whose aspirations have never been realized because of slavery. And then when we think about after slavery, just because the sign is not on the water fountain doesn't mean everybody rushes to drink. And then we look at the discrimination that passed after slavery. And then the issue that we think about not only as it relates to discrimination, that we as people in the 50s could not swim in the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, off the coast of California. That we have identified in this city the fire stations where signs are posted, colored firefighters eating room, white firefighters eating room. Those are the tags of slavery that continue in the sense of addressing discrimination that will go on in a lifetime. And no matter how well we write it and say we are a melting pot, or whether we say we are a beautiful cloth, or whatever way we use as a terminology, we always have to realize that there are people who started hundreds of years behind, and it will take them a variety of ways and hundreds of years to catch up. And we just can't stop because we say we're tired, or it's been too long, or let's go on to the next issue because it's something more relevant today. This Conyers legislation, and he's been at this for a while, it's important that we support it. And as someone said in a meeting the other day, it seems that when things happen in the West, they go east. And so it's important that we establish where we stand as a council, and that we move forward on this and find ways to where at each occasion we have the ability to let people know what we stand for as a city. And it's nothing more important than eliminating discrimination, and to not only identify our history and what others did, but identify a roadmap of how we never return to that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Parks. I'll just offer my support for this also, and it's now time for the council to vote. Clerk, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
13 ayes.
That matter passes. Thank you. Next item.
Mr. President, I believe there was a request to take item 21 out of order.
The item is 11. We've been requested to move 11 forward.
Item 11 was called
So
special by
11, please.
Councilmember Cardenas.
Thank you very much. If the CAO representatives can come to the table, please. Thank you very much. Colleagues, as you may recall, there was a lengthy discussion on this floor in November of this past year regarding this MICLA 2006 A-lease revenue bonds for the police headquarters and public works building, which we were talking about $500 million. It ended up being $448 million in bonds sold. At that meeting, the staff had recommended, the CAO staff had recommended that the sale be done on a competitive basis. We as a council made the policy decision to sell the bonds on a negotiated basis. As a result of the dialogue, Councilman Weiss requested that the CAO hire an independent financial advisor to analyze the success of the sale. The CAO fulfilled that request. The independent financial analysis has been submitted and was heard by committee, and now we're going to have an opportunity to discuss some of it here before the full council. Thank you very much. I think we had a very robust discussion in committee. I'm hoping maybe we can have a condensed, robust discussion here before the people of Los Angeles. I think it's important for us to understand that much controversy ensued between the previous committee hearings last year and the two hearings here on the floor. And unfortunately, there were some major misinterpretations by the press, and I don't blame the press because the dialogue here was, in my opinion, a little bit one-sided on one major point. And I'd like to start with that. There was a figure that the previous CEO, who's now retired, had mentioned about $20 to $21 million were potentially at risk if we went with a negotiated method versus a competitive method. And this third-party independent report, did it prove to be true that we now are at a loss of dollars now that the sale has actually happened, or does the report point to that a loss did not occur based on that kind of dialogue? My time, please.
First of all, let me mention that we do have Lisa Smith from Gardner Underwood, who is the firm that actually did the independent financial analysis with us at the table, as well as Natalie Brill, who's the chief of our debt management group. Actually, the report as submitted shows that the city did very well on its sale and did benefit from some of the structural changes that were being able to be made to the issue. And so it really did not look at the $21 million number per se. It evaluated how the city did relative to other issues in the market, and in fact relative to the market that week, and found that the city did a very good job in terms of the price it paid for its debt.
Well, you brought up the fact that it didn't talk about that $21 million. Well, frankly, it's cut to the chase. That $21 million was a figure thrown out as a speculative figure. It wasn't a factual figure, correct? Was it ever a factual figure?
My understanding is that figure was based on a historical average of how the city had done on prior MICLA financings, and it probably was not going to be the best indicator of future performance.
Okay. Now, we ended up using a negotiated sale method. Can you point out for us, is there anything in the independent report that actually points to anything negative that occurred because we went with a negotiated method versus a competitive method?
In terms of the pricing of the city's bonds, no.
Okay. Well, let's be a little bit more in layman's terms.
Yeah.
Now that the sale has actually occurred, and we can look back and actually dissect it, not prospectively speculating, but look back and say, well, based on our analysis, the third-party analysis, is there anything that happened that was a negative, something that, gosh, golly, shucks, had we gone competitive, we would have been better off?
I think in terms of the sale, in terms of the price the city paid, no, the report did refer to a couple of procedural issues that were basically timing issues in terms of when reports were produced, but nothing that impacted the price the city paid on its debt.
Okay, when you say impact the price, that's really what our fiduciary responsibility is first and foremost, is trying to do the best with the city's dollars, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so when it comes to doing the best for the city's dollars, there's nothing in the report that points to that this particular sale method cost the people of Los Angeles money.
That's correct.
Okay. Speaking of costing the people of Los Angeles money, what's the underwriter's discount? Can you give a real quick?
Right. Well, the underwriter's discount is basically the compensation paid to the underwriting syndicate for marketing and selling the bonds, and for all the work that goes into that. It can also take into account the underwriting group's advice on how the bonds should be structured, how particular maturities should be sized, how many dollars you put in each maturity. So that is their compensation for advising the city on the deal and actually selling the bonds.
Okay. Another point that unfortunately was quoted by one of the local press about what was said by the previous CAO, and that was when he said that the deal may cost the city at least $21 million and that he wanted, quote, the city to benefit, not the underwriters. Did the underwriters in the negotiated sale benefit more than they would have if it was a competitive sale? I may remind you that in the black and white print on the documents that were already printed, anticipating we go on competitive, actually was allowing them, the underwriter fees, to go as high as 5 points. Not that that was going to be the case, but the allowable amount was up to 5 points. Correct, Natalie? We talked about this before.
That's correct.
That's correct. But what was the underwriter fee in this particular case?
I think it was 2 point. Go ahead, Lisa. Lisa
Speak
has
into
the
the
numbers right in
microphone,
front of her. Yeah.
Hi, it's Lisa Smith from Gardner Underwood. The total compensation for the underwriters, they do it on a per bond basis, and it was 2.80.
Okay, 2.80. So again, in layman's terms, we potentially could have paid as much as 5 points. We ended up paying 2.8 points. So technically speaking, nobody could say that the underwriters got away with a whole heck of a lot of money looking at this particular industry and what could be charged or is charged, because it varies from case to case, right?
That's
so the
correct.
2.8 is not considered high, is it?
No.
Third-party answer?
It's very low.
No, it's not high at all. It's very competitive.
Very competitive. Natalie, what was our average on our competitives over the previous few years or transactions or what have you?
I don't know per bond how much it was.
Okay, fair enough. One of the things I'd like to point out, it got very heated last time, and the discussion was very robust. And also, I'll repeat again, my respect for Bill Fujioka is tremendous. And I respect him and appreciate all the wonderful things that he did in his professional capacity as a city. But unfortunately, the discussion got to the point where one of my colleagues, and I'll quote again, I remember this being said, and the papers took them verbatim, and it says, quote, "This dialogue has created an environment where we are feeding into the critics by our actions," Councilman Ed Reyes said. And it says, quote, "I want to be clear that the integrity of this council is on the table and that we are taking the proper action." The reason why I say that is because, unfortunately, the last time when we discussed this, it was interpreted by people outside this room that we were doing something either underhanded or something that was wrong or something that was going to be expensive for the people of Los Angeles, and basically not applying our fiduciary responsibilities, which is to look at the people first and foremost, not to be looking at firms or businesses, to look to the taxpayer and the people of Los Angeles first, and to not look at benefiting other third parties rather than looking at what our responsibility is first and foremost. I point that out because I want to know from this report, this third-party report, now that the transaction has taken place, is there anything in it that would point to or that has stated that anything wrong happened here?
No. No, I think the city got a very good deal on its bonds. The report points to the fact that the underwriters, through their aggressive pre-marketing, were able to come to a place where we had what we call oversubscribed the issue. We had about twice as many orders as we had bonds to sell, which contributed to the ability of the underwriters, along with a very favorable turn in the market, to reprice the bonds at lower interest rates. So overall, the city did very well.
Okay, well, and also I want to clarify, because negotiator competitive, it's the luck of the draw. When you go out to market, if it's improving on you,
That's right.
And
That's
it
right.
improves, you're happy,
Right.
we're all smiling because we did well, and we're going to spend less money over a long period of time. Now I don't think anybody here wants to take credit for that. That's just somebody else or just the way the winds blow. But when it comes to the actual flexibility of the negotiated method over competitive method, were we able to exercise some of our flexibility that isn't necessarily inherent in the competitive method that actually benefited the taxpayers of Los Angeles?
Lisa's firm pointed out that one maturity did not have sufficient buyers, and the underwriters were able, through the negotiated method of sale, to trifurcate, or basically break into three pieces a particular maturity to meet the demand of a specific investor, which allowed us to do well in terms of, first of all, selling that maturity, and second of all, getting a good price for it.
So that's is what happened under the negotiated method. Would that have likely happened under a competitive method?
I don't think so. The reason I'm hesitating is I think part of the issue that we encountered here through this discussion, the history of this discussion, is that financial markets have matured over time. And so in some ways, competitive sales have gotten closer to negotiated forms of sale, and negotiated sales have gotten closer to competitive forms of sale. And to that goes to your earlier comment. The underwriting discount earned by firms is now very transparent. We know where every dollar of that discount goes. That was not always the case 10, 15 years ago. Similarly, competitive sales were thought to be very inflexible. You issue a notice of sale and then you can't do anything. Well, competitive sales now have evolved so that you can issue changes to your bond structure as late as 24 hours before the sale. But you don't have the flexibility on the day of sale to make the changes that were made by our underwriters. If it had been a competitive sale, they could have not done that trifurcation of that maturity.
And exercising that some of those flexibilities which occurred here actually benefited the people of Los Angeles financially.
That's correct.
Good,
That's
good.
correct.
I'm glad to hear that. My last question before my time is up on my first round of points is, based on the report, the independent report pointing out that on the points that were lowered up to 1 to 2 basis points on the longer-term bonds and up to 3 to 4 basis points on the shorter-term bonds, does that translate it over time into a few tens of thousands of dollars in savings for the city, or potentially in the millions?
I'll point to Lisa on the short term because she actually did the calculation, so I rely on her math much better than mine.
Thank you.
For your specific question, we have not done that calculation today, but just to kind of give you a quick overview, and it would be a quick and dirty back of the envelope figure, yes, it would translate to savings. You have to look at the average life of the bond issue to try and get a good sense of what the whole cost would be, and that average life is about 19 years, and 1 basis point would be $44,000. So 44 times the 19 years could give you a back of the envelope about $800,000 in savings.
So $44,000 on 1 basis point per how much bonds sold?
44,000 is based on a bond size of $448 million.
Okay. So potentially it's 750,000-ish, potentially.
Potentially.
Ballpark.
And this is really back of the envelope.
So what that forces me to ask is this question. How does somebody extrapolate on a $500 million bond, how does somebody extrapolate the potential loss of $20 million when the actual happenings of this particular case on $450 million, potentially we've saved about $750,000? The magnitude difference is horrendous. I think it's appropriate for us as policymakers to understand that answer so that as we do this in the future and we create bond policy as we're doing, we understand how can somebody arrive at that figure?
Having not done the math myself, I can only say that I think the method that was used, again, my understanding is the method that was used was based on a historical average, and it was applied to this sale. I think in retrospect, probably with more time, there would have been more thought given to the method and also the method of calculation. I'm not aware if we've been able to actually duplicate that number. I know it's been a number highly touted in the press. It's been one bandied about in the community. I'm looking to Natalie to see if we've actually, because we've looked at this number. And again, I think perhaps looking back in the heat of debate and in the heat of the moment, there may have been some errors made.
Okay, that's why we try to take our time about these things. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Smith, followed by Mr. Parks, Mr. Weezer, Mr. Rosendahl, and Mr. Zine.
Wow.
Just thought I'd let you all know how many people are on the
Well,
queue.
I'm going to be very kind and be very short then. Primarily because I think Mr. Cardenas did an excellent job of presenting the case, answering a lot of the questions I was going to ask. Just kind of generally, though, Ms. Sisson or Ms. Smith, either one, you used the word very good, very well a couple times to describe how this happened. And overall, you've said this worked well. It's well enough that we're recommending this for future reference now, for future bond issues as well? Or is it just the one-time instance in the one-time market that you feel comfortable with?
That's a good question. I think you're always in trouble when you're trying to compare across time frames, as we've seen with the question Councilman Cardenas asked about how that number was calculated. In terms of a method of sale, to get right to your point, there is always a place for both methods of sale. There are some things that are very appropriate for a competitive method of sale. There are others that are appropriated for a negotiated method of sale. And this council has, in fact, asked our office to come back with some recommendations about how a method of sale would be chosen that will be discussed in the ad hoc committee and then brought forward. And this is one place where finance is not a science. It's an art. And that is picking the right method of sale for the circumstance, and many times it will depend on the market itself. For example, in this sale, we benefited from the fact that we were able to change the day of the sale. So we avoided, a big issue coming through from the county that might have put price pressure on our bonds by moving it by a day. If the market supply looked different, competitive sale might have been more appropriate. So there really isn't a black and white answer to that question. It is one of the areas in finances that's subjective, but it is one that we've been asked to come forward with a policy for the council's consideration.
Well, and on that point, too, I think what Mr. Cardenas told us when we had this spirited debate, as he calls it, is that this process, negotiating process, gives us flexibility over a time frame to move with the market or back off from the market and take advantage of time. And apparent that worked very well, and you've said $750,000, $800,000 may be the value. What time frame do we need to wait to know with reasonable expectation that this is going to be in that range or it's not? Is it 10 years, 5 years? What do we have to wait to really put a number on it and say, we know where this is going?
Well, with a little more time, we can go back and do the full calculation. It's what complicates it. You might want to say, well, let's just look at the difference in interest rate and apply it to the par amount of the bond. But remember that bonds amortize like your mortgage. So principal's at the end, interest is up at front. So you really have to do the calculation with the average life and duration of the issue. That's why it's not, when the councilman asked us that question, it wasn't something we could do at the back of the envelope. So we can ask Gardner to go back, do that calculation, and come forward with a specific number.
Okay, but that will take how long to do?
We can do it in the next couple of days.
Oh, no, okay.
Yeah.
So with reasonable expectation,
Yeah.
because like you said, the interest is up front,
Right,
so you can
right.
pretty well guess what that'll be.
Well, and we know what the coupons are in each bond, so it's just a matter of doing the math, which is a little bit more sophisticated than multiplication.
Okay. Well, back of the envelope is something we all do in public policy, and it's certainly valuable to do. So I just want to thank you.
I'm going to be very careful about the numbers I use.
Yeah, I presume so. I just remember, as Councilman Cardenas said, we had a very spirited debate. Many of us didn't know what we were talking about specifically. There's very, very fine details about how we issue bonds, how the system works. And this council had never delved into that before. We took it on the faith of our CAO, CLA, on how we did business. And we did that business for a long time the same way, while the rest of the state and everybody else was going another direction. And I think many of us looked to Councilman Cardenas from his expertise in Sacramento dealing with these issues, and we gave him our blind faith that this was the right way to go, because the argument was very succinct and very appropriate and really well stated that this is in our best interest to try. We did try it. It seems to have worked, and I want to just commend Councilman Cardenas for taking us where no man has gone before in this city council and into a way that really is beneficial to the taxpayers of L.A., and I hope he will write a letter to that certain newspaper out in the valley that questioned your motives for doing this, because your motives were very clear to me. It was what's right for the city of L.A. and for the taxpayers of L.A., and it proved to be beneficial. And I commend Mr. Cardenas for taking us that direction, and thank you for helping us get down that road. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Parks.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to start off by telling Tony, you knew you were right in the beginning, and it proved out, and you didn't deserve those articles because you had in mind a direction, you did your homework, and it's something in which I think all of this is proven out, and it's just unfortunate that those that jumped in the middle of it without knowing the background would write such articles about you. And so I just want to ask Ms. Smith, who probably gave, and I mentioned to her after the meeting in committee, a very logical explanation of what all this means, because 4 years ago, I would not have known anything about bonds until we start getting into it and begin to ask the questions. And you might give a little thumbnail of exactly what we asked you to do and what your view is what the outcome was.
Okay. Our firm was hired by the city to provide an independent review of the transaction after the transaction had been priced. We did not work on the financing at all. We were just the third-party observer. And what we did is we analyzed the transaction. We looked at the market. We looked at competitive sales, comparable sales that were priced during the same week that were the same type of issue. We looked at economic indicators. We looked at everything that could impact the financing to determine whether or not the city received a fair and competitive pricing. And in a nutshell, we found that the bond financing went extremely well. It actually was one of the best price financings for the week, in a week that was probably the largest in the year as of that date of last year. So the city did very well by the financing. The underwriting team did a great job in selling the bonds, and the city's going to pay lower than they anticipated.
And if I understood what you told us in committee, the one thing that was to our benefit was that we had the ability to change the date. Now, how did that come about, and why would we have that advantage in this process and may not have had it in another process?
You could have had it in a competitive sale. It probably would not have happened as readily. What you have with an underwriting team, they're actually looking at the market. They're talking to their investors consistently and constantly. They found that there were going to be a lot of issues coming to market at the same time, and they thought there was going to be an LA County deal that was very similar pricing on the same day. They thought it was in the best interest of the city is to move it to the following day. That way they would have reduced competition, and they would have more investor attraction to the issue.
Now, that's something that the bond sellers made, or is that something that they come back to the city to get our approval? How did that decision get made, and who's responsible for that?
The underwriters brought it up with the transactional financial advisors as well as with city staff, and they all agreed on it.
City makes the ultimate.
Natalie Brill, the city actually makes the ultimate decision based on the advice of the underwriters and the financial advisor. And I think about 2 weeks before, we had mentioned to Councilman Cardenas that we probably would be moving the date because we started to realize that the state, who's always the big gorilla in the room, was going to issue $1 billion, and that the county. And then we figured out everybody else started coming to market too. So it was really a joint decision, but the ultimate decision is with the city.
Okay. And so I think when your analysis at committee, Ms. Smith, was that we pretty well met all our goals. We had local companies involved. We got the lowest rate. We had the flexibility of those underwriters making decisions as the process was going. So basically, we bought their brains in addition to selling bonds. And so did you see anything we didn't fulfill as it relates to what the mission was when we moved in that direction?
No, from the true financing, looking at it, the financial impact, there was no negative impact at all to the city.
Thank you very much. And let me say again, Tony, thank you for your leadership on that.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Mr. Weeser.
Thank you very much. And I think you may have touched on this before, but the senior manager actually bifurcated and trifurcated various maturities. Now, what did that allow us to do? And that's not allowed under competitive.
It's allowed. It's just typically not done. Underwriters wouldn't do that normally. What happened was there were some maturities where they didn't have enough orders to fully allocate all the bonds to, but they had different investors that wanted different interest rates. So what they were able to do is to offer 2 different sets of interest rates in terms of bifurcating, or 3 for trifurcating. One maturity, they offered 3 different interest rates, and were able to sell those to certain investors.
So it could have been allowed in a competitive, but not in this instance.
It's allowed, but it's rarely seen.
But in negotiated, it's a lot more flexible to be
It's
able
more
to do
flexible.
that. You see what's coming at you, you look at the indicators and say, okay, let's use this.
The difference with the competitive is you don't really talk to your investors until after you've bought the bonds. On a negotiated sale, you're talking to your investors as you're pricing the bonds.
Great, thank you. And in the report, you state that the method of sale should be carefully determined on a deal-by-deal basis. At the same time, later in the report, you say that you're looking at developing policies on negotiated and competitive methods of sale. So you're going to develop some policies, but at the same time, apply those policies to a case-by-case basis. Or what does that mean?
Well, there will be a couple of things that will go into those policies. One will be, what are the market conditions at the time? Okay, how much competition are you creating for your bonds? Sometimes you can create more competition on a competitive basis than you can on a negotiated basis. Another thing that will be the type of transaction we're doing. In this case, we did need to do some special things to certain maturities. There will be certain things the city will finance that will require some creativity, either in terms of the revenue that we're using to pay off the bonds, or what we're financing, where it would be hard on a competitive basis to really explain that to investors and get the best price. And so the value of having not only financial advisors, but an underwriting team that is out there pre-marketing that sale and explaining those unique circumstances to investors would result in a better price. So it really is dependent on where the market conditions are, supply, demand, also in terms of what types of bonds there are. And there are times when a competitive sale makes sense. But clearly, I think what we are seeing is, as I believe Councilmember Smith pointed out, there has been a trend to move more towards negotiated because of the flexibility and also because it's much more transparent now than it has been historically.
Great. Thank you very much, and I too want to thank Councilmember Cardenas for moving forward and sticking to your guns, really, when you had newspapers against you and people were questioning your motives, and this shows that you really stood up for what you believed in, and I'm glad you did, because I'm a huge proponent, as I think most of us are on this council, to support local small businesses, and we're seeing a tremendous benefit here to local small businesses. And here, as any other part of the city that we do business, we should think creatively about how to do that. We often hear that there's not enough qualified small businesses, not enough qualified minority businesses. They're out there. We could do more with them. We just have to get creative, and this was certainly one of those ways to do it. So thank you, Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl.
Thank you, Madam President. I had the distinct pleasure and opportunity to be on the committee when DWP was the big issue. And I'll never forget that day when they said approve $1.8 billion and approve it now. And a whole line of questioning came out about why do we need to do it now. I ended up seconding Mr. Cardenas's motion on that. We sent it back, and lo and behold, they came back with a better mix and a better opportunity. So I know where Tony comes from and how he can be a pit bull. So first I want to applaud him for his leadership on this, and it was gutsy to do what he did. What is a retail period? Would you explain that to me? Hold my time.
A retail period is when an underwriter markets bonds to individual investors, typically mom and pop, your individuals who would buy municipal bonds.
How much was the issuance sold at that period on 11/30/07?
Let me check. I'm not sure exact figures, and I don't want to be quoted saying the wrong thing. So.
While you're looking for it, could we have done a retail period under a competitive method of sales? Why or why not?
You could not have done a retail period on a competitive sale. Retail period was typically you pricing the bonds before you're actually going to market. You're getting investors lined up. In a competitive sale, an underwriter just buys the bonds and then they sell it after. They sell them afterwards.
When we were here before the council, the former CAO clearly said it was in the city's best interest to go competitive. And that was said over and over and over again. What happened on this particular day that changed that dynamic? And what lessons have we learned going forward when we want to get this kind of support?
I think that analysis is based on the past, that our competitive deals have done extremely well. And we had done analysis that showed that because of our credit rating and the type of investors who bought our deals, we had done very well competitive. Yeah. And we were highly rated, and people liked our bonds. When we did wastewater, for example, on a variable rate deal, we had a $300 million sale, and we had $3 billion in orders. I mean, it was just incredible. They like our credit. What we didn't take into account, I think, and one of the lessons that we learned here was that there are different goals that each city has. And I think that it's up to the mayor and council to give us what those goals are. And one of them was the participation of smaller firms. And as Karen said, we have moved so much closer and competitive and negotiated to where they're very similar. I mean, they're distinct, but they're both transparent. They're very similar, that our credit rating and the type of pre-marketing that happens can afford us just as low interest rates as we had seen in the past. And the only information that we had was, unfortunately, or fortunately, the past. So I think that's one of the, the lessons that we've learned. And we're looking at our policies, and we're looking at, different ways of doing these deals moving forward.
That's very good to hear. And back to the other question, how much of this issuance was sold in that period?
16% of the issue was sold on a retail basis.
16%. Thank you for that. Now, going forward, it just gives us another tool, right? So we can go from competitive, if we think it makes sense, or we can go retail. How will we determine, with the next one coming up, which one will be better for the city? Because right now, we saved taxpayers, didn't we? Some $750,000 at least?
So we think, more or less.
Based on the report, yes, we saved $750,000. It's hard, I hesitate because we didn't do a competitive sale on the same day. So we don't know exactly what the differential would have been, but we feel very good about what transpired and the work that our underwriting team did to get this result. That being said, again, this is an area where it's really not sort of a check yes or no competitive negotiated. It really will depend on things as they come forward. And I want to say, as someone who has sort of been involved at a distance of debt issuance, one thing that is positive here is that part of that history of competitive sale has been the will of the council itself. Okay, competitive sale is the most conservative method of bond sale. Okay, and you know, there have been other municipalities that have done other types of debt instruments that Los Angeles has not done because it has a very conservative policy in terms of its debt structure and its debt issuance, which has served the city very well in terms of its credit rating and its access to the financial markets. As we have more experience with the negotiating form of sale and obviously achieving the additional policy goal of being able to include small and local firms more on these underwriting teams, it will also give us the opportunity to look at different types of financial instruments moving forward that might you know, assist the city going forward with modifications to its debt structure. So all that is to say, when you look at different instruments, some instruments lend themselves to a particular type of sale, competitive or negotiated, depending on the type of instrument that's being developed. One of the things Councilman Cardenas has talked about in the ad hoc committees is the fact that your underwriting team, they're the people most in touch with the markets. They know what financial instruments investors are demanding. And so as we become more informed and educated on what sorts of things might be appropriate for the city, those types of instruments may dictate whether we do a competitive sale or a negotiated sale.
And I want to thank you, the three of you, for what you did, because here we were in a situation where we had no background, no experience, no track record, and you jumped to the plate and you were absolutely flexible within that mix. I applaud you very much, and I thank you, Mr. Cardenas, for your leadership on this.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl. Mr. Zine.
Thank you. I'd like to know why my colleague was beaten up on this matter, when apparently he was right. Can you answer that question?
Boy, I can't. I wasn't the one doing the beating.
Well, I know you didn't beat him up. But when you read some articles, he was like the villain of City Hall, and he comes from the state where he was Budget and Finance Chair, which I have a lot of respect for his position as a former state assembly member. Yet, when this issue came up, which he was very passionate about, it seemed that he took all the negative shots. And as we're hearing today, this afternoon, he was right. Correct? You were here, I remember you were here during this fine debate. Karen wasn't. You were up in some lofty chair upstairs. But when we were going through this whole ordeal, no one really stood up for what he was trying to represent, which now, months later, it turns out that he was accurate. I'm just trying to find out why he became the villain on this whole issue.
I think part of the debate around the numbers was very unfortunate. I think that's part of what crystallized some of that. And I do think there was some concern about process in terms of the inability to go out with because of timing reasons, to go out with a specific RFP for this issue. I think, you know, it was really those two sides of the coin, you know, that just, it was sort of like a perfect storm of elements.
But when it turns out, and after the storm passes, he was correct. It saved the taxpayers money. It was the right direction that this council and his leadership followed, which is what I'm hearing now, the accolades after the dust settles.
The city did very well, and I think, you know, the fact that Councilmember Weiss and the mayor and actually others after the official notification asked for this report, it's very good to have an independent person look at what we do and to come back and report to us without having any dog in the fight on an objective basis what the results were, and the results, as you mentioned, speak for themselves.
Well, we'll drag it out a little longer anyway. If you can explain, because these folks with the green tags are obviously in no rush. They've been here since 10 o'clock. What is the pre-marketing period? Can you explain that, the pre-marketing period?
The pre-marketing period, when you have a negotiated sale and investment banks know that they are going to get certain allocations of bonds, they're out there talking to their investors, whether they're retail investors, as Lisa said, that are more typically individuals, you know, like people in this room that may have a few $1,000s to invest, or whether it's institutional investors that they're talking to, money market funds, hedge funds that may have an appetite for City of Los Angeles credit. They're out there talking to people and seeing, you know, what's your interest, what types of interest rates are you willing to pay, what kind of size are you looking for, what kind of maturity, and they can sort of drum up all of the, you know, purchasers for all the different maturities of bonds. And that's what benefited us on the day of sale, that having that market intelligence, they were able to restructure the issue somewhat in order to get us the best price.
Did we have that in this particular case?
Yes, we did.
So we did that.
That's one of the reasons we did so well, was the benefit of that.
So it was
pre-marketing
beneficial to us in the fact that it saved
Absolutely.
us. And is the pre-marketing period typically done under a competitive or negotiated sale period?
It's not typically done on a competitive sale, not direct. As Lisa, I think, rightly pointed out, and articulately pointed out, in a competitive sale, you talk with your investor after you have the bond. So the underwriter has already put their capital at risk by purchasing the bond, and then they have to sort of talk to their investors afterwards. In a negotiated sale, the advantage you have is that the underwriters are talking with investors, and you know, any of you, I'm sure there are many investment firms that would love to have any of you sit at their desk on the day they are doing a negotiated sale, and you can see the phones and the you know, comm centers going back and forth that, you know, well, I need this structure, this maturity, and so we benefit by being able to really meet market demand almost perfectly. I mean, financial markets are probably among the most efficient still around, and that investor can say, I want this at this price, and the underwriter might move them a little or the other, but, you know, those two markets meet, you know, on that desk.
Okay. So
On a competitive deal, the opposite happens. The underwriters bid against each other. Like sometimes we have 9 or 10 bidding, and they'll bid, and then they take on the entire risk, and they purchase the bonds, and then they go to the investor and say, okay, I have this maturity at 5%, do you want it?
So they market it after that?
Correct, and
Okay.
that's the difference between the pre-marketing and then the normal marketing of, I'm sorry, the marketing of the competitive.
And were these AAA?
No,
Insured. They were AAA insured.
AAA insured?
Yes, they are insured, but our rating is AA minus. It's one notch below our AA rating because it's considered a lease revenue bond.
And what was the interest rate that was paid for the investors?
4.33%.
4.33?
For,
And
yeah.
that's federal and state tax-free, or just?
Yes, they're all tax-exempt bonds.
On both federal and state?
Correct, and the
That's-
average life was 19 years. To give you a comparison, on the solid waste that we did, I think about 6 months ago, we got a 4.2, but the average life was 11 years. So when you look at those two, we did very well for a longer investment.
Right, okay. So we acknowledge you for having that wisdom and insight, and maybe the newspaper will do an article saying that you weren't the evil villain at City Hall. Thank you.
The bond buyer actually did do an article and praised us for our negotiated sale and how well we did, and they did call us, the CAO's office, and we told them what a great sale we had and how pleased we were. Despite, as Councilman Cardenas said, all the negative press that we got, we did very well, and we were featured as one of their articles.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and Tony, add to the accolades being given today about sticking to your guns, so.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you very much. By the way, those negative articles, I did get calls from some of my elected colleagues around the country asking me if I was going to be all right and what the heck's going on over there. So I'm glad to hear that the bond buyer, which is a very well-respected technical paper, actually analyzed it or looked at it and said, thumbs up, Los Angeles, good work. I'm glad to hear that. But speaking, my last point about the press is that I want to read something again. One of the editorials by one of the local papers said that council squanders taxpayer money on local political heavyweight instead of awarding bond contract to the highest bidder. On the first point about squandering of taxpayer money, in a nutshell, was any taxpayer money squandered now that we've been able to look at what we've done?
No.
Natalie? Could you speak into the microphone, please?
No.
No? Lisa?
No.
Okay, thank you. And the reason why I say that is because the silence of the first dialogues was deafening. The only comments that were made by the then CAO was that potentially we could lose tens of millions of dollars. But he literally refused to answer the question when Councilmember Reyes asked him, could we benefit financially by this method? He remained silent. And in my opinion, that's why the press picked up on that, and they only heard one thing, and they ran with it. Natalie, did the firms in this particular transaction, because that was under question, just in that one statement it was alluded to, the firms, did they prove that they were qualified and capable, now looking at the work that was done?
Yes.
Okay, so they were qualified and capable based on the fact that they were on the syndicate list by the DWP in that sense, but when they actually did the transaction, they actually proved in reality that they could handle the work, because they did do good work, correct?
Yes, the only comment I believe that Gardner made on that was that it took a little longer to run the numbers, but it's still unclear to us what happened. It could have just been, the market was very busy that day. But we felt that all the underwriters stepped up to the plate and did a really great job for the city, and were all very cooperative, and there were no complaints from staff. They were excellent.
Wait a minute, Natalie, how do you know that they did that? Were you actually there when they were doing the work?
Yes, part of the job of the city is to get there at 5:30 in the morning when the markets begin to open, and to see how the market is doing and to start pricing the bonds. So when we actually sell, we see it, and you literally sit down with the underwriters and you negotiate the price of each maturity. And depending on how the market goes, that price, like we said, will go up a couple basis points, go down a couple basis points. In this case, we never had to go up as economic indicators came out, and as the market started to go down, our bond price started to go down also. So it was a very positive experience for us.
And again, we were able to use that flexibility and take advantage of that market.
Exactly.
Good.
Exactly.
So Natalie, I'm going to ask you a couple personal questions, and I asked you in committee. So you witnessed the sale. You were physically there when they were doing the buying and the selling on our behalf?
Yes.
Okay. Was this the first time that you actually sat through a process like that?
On a fixed rate deal, yes.
Okay, thank you. Did you learn more about bond sales during that day?
Yes.
So it was a learning experience. It's good,
Definitely.
right? Okay, excellent. Are you more knowledgeable today than you were before that day?
Yes.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And those are questions out of respect for the fact that as a professional, you chose to go, you exercised your responsibility, and as a result of that, you know more, you witnessed more, et cetera, and now that we're going to be creating this policy and we're going to be taking on some of your recommendations, it's good to know that you are now looking at it more today. You're smiling more about when we're discussing this than we were before. So I just wanted to say I'm glad to see that it was a positive experience, not only for the city, but our advisors, your advisors.
Yes.
So with that, I'd like to ask you one last question, Natalie. Are you a little bit surprised based on the heated dialogue last time, and maybe even pleased with the fact that now that we're looking at Lisa's firm's report, that things turned out good?
I'm very pleased things turned out well. I was concerned that they wouldn't. And as staff to the mayor and council, I would never want one of our deals not to go well. I was really, happy and pleased at how everybody worked well together and how well we did. And, I know that in the future, we're confident now that we can move forward and do these type of deals, and they can turn out okay. Because when you talk to your colleagues in other cities, you do hear those horror stories. And being a large city and being a great rated city, it really helped us, and it really did. And a lot of the investors called me after the fact and were very pleased also. And I think that it was a very positive experience for our first one, and I'm really glad it went well.
And I think it's very important that you pointed out that a lot of cities do a lot of things, and sometimes things go bad or don't go well, or some person or some firm infiltrated it and kind of didn't do their fiduciary responsibility, and the taxpayers suffered. I would like to bring the discussion back to a point so that people don't worry that we did something crazy and outlandish and we were way out there.
No.
This negotiated method is a common practice, and it really came down to the fine question and answer of which way do we go. It wasn't like, let's do competitive. It's completely safe, non-risk, the only best way to go, and then all of a sudden we did this negotiated, it's just off the wall, crazy, nobody ever does it. Were we still doing something that is, by and large, common practice and safe for cities like ours?
Yes, 2-to-1, most cities do negotiate over competitive. And like I said, we've also done negotiated, but on the variable side, on the short-term side. So we had experience with pricing on that side, but not on the fixed rate. And it's very common. You know, we have done a couple of swaps also, which are out there, which are not everybody does. So I think this just gave us one more tool to be able to take a bond issue, analyze it, and see which is the best way to go.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask you one last question to clarify what the press had said. The second half of that heading on that editorial was that it should have gone to the highest bidder. It's actually the opposite, correct? You go to
Correct.
the lowest bidder.
It's
in
the
this
lowest to interest cost, correct.
Okay. Again, a layperson might think that we were doing something crazy. In reality, that's a misunderstanding right there that was reported to the people. In closing, I'd like to thank Jack Weiss for somewhat giving me back my good name by asking for this third-party independent report, because if you just read the articles that ensued after the discussion and debate in November, you would think that we were doing something bad, underhanded, bad for the people of Los Angeles, and it was just not, all in all no good. So I want to thank you for asking for that report. I was going to ask for it, but you asked for it, and I prefer that a third person ask for it, so we're not thinking that we're choreographing anything. Was it, Lisa, was anything choreographed with your firm?
Not at all.
Good. You're smiling. So you enjoyed the fact that we asked you to give up your free time and to do this third-party report?
I don't know if enjoyed's the right word, but it was a good report. I mean, it was fun to do for the city.
Okay, but at least fun. And also, I'd like to thank my colleagues for listening and acknowledging that we had a job to do here, and it wasn't easy after the back and forth that you saw between the then CAO and us council members, but I'm glad to see that you were willing to listen to what I was saying, that you at least trusted the fact that we were able to do what we needed to do. And the good thing about it is everything came out just fine. So thank you all very much for doing what you did, and thank you all very much for your report.
Thank you, Mr. Cardenas. Madam Clerk, is this a note and file? Any questions?
This is a committee report that needs acted on.
Okay, committee report. So, Madam Clerk, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the votes.
13 ayes.
That item's been approved. Next item I believe we're going to is item number 21. Okay. And I know I'd like to call on Mr. Reyes, then Mr. Rosendahl, and then I know we're going to have public comment after that.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to ask our staff to come to the front desk for some questions. Colleagues, this is a report coming to you from the Planning and Land Use Management Committee, a report from the CLA's office and the city attorney regarding the compliance with the writ of mandate in environmentalism through inspiration and nonviolent action for the City of LA, Playa Capital Company. And it's a rather long, very complicated case. There's been several public hearings on this matter. I believe Councilman Rosendahl had asked for some of the hearings that did occur. And I think a few went a couple hours long. We did close public hearing in the last plum committee, but again, it's purview of this body to open it up again if that is the choice of this body. I just want to can you give us a very general description of what we're doing today? And I would like to ask you a few questions, but if you can just give us a general description of what is on the table today.
Certainly. Well, I think if we could, I'll ask Ms. Van to very briefly indicate the court proceedings and why we're here where we are, why we're here today. And then I will very briefly talk about the process and the results of the peer review study that the council asked us to do last January.
Hey, Susan Fan with the City Attorney's Office here with Tim McWilliams. We are here in response to some litigation that was filed against the city called the Environmentalism Through Inspiration and Nonviolent Action, which I refer to as the ATINA litigation. The ATINA litigation challenged an action this council took back in 2000. And in 2000, long after the Playa Vista property had been approved and while it was under construction, the issue came up about whether or not it was safe there because of methane gas. And since the council at the time was considering whether or not to issue Melrose bond financing, it asked for a study on this issue of methane and other toxic gases at the time. The CLA was directed to do this study, consulted with many experts. Period of time passed, got all the information together, and the methane study that was prepared essentially concluded that there was, with certain mitigation measures, there was no safety hazard or significant impacts on the environment as a result of the methane and other toxic gases. Sometime after that, this lawsuit was brought. It actually challenged the City Council's action in noting and filing this methane report. The court, basically the claim was that the City Council, that this was a CEQA action, the City Council should have prepared an EIR on these issues in the methane report. We went to the trial court. It took a long time to get actually to trial, but the city won. All of the city's arguments were adopted by the trial court, and then the matter went on to appeal. And in front of the Court of Appeal found a couple of things. Firstly, it found that the city had properly concluded that the methane impacts were mitigated to insignificance and that no additional environmental review was required. Because, of course, at this time when we initially approved the Playa Vista project, City Council had certified an EIR, and that EIR had been challenged in court and had withstood review. But the Court of Appeal also concluded one other thing, and that's why we're here today. It concluded that there wasn't enough evidence in the record before it that the city, to show that the city had made a determination whether groundwater dewatering itself would cause a significant impact on the environment. And so the court said in the absence of any evidence in front of it, it couldn't presume that the city had made that finding. And so it sent the whole matter back to order the city to do that. So it came back to the trial court, and about a little over a year ago now, the court issued a writ of mandate directing to the city to set aside the approval of the methane study for the purpose of studying the impacts of dewatering to determine whether or not an additional EIR needed to be prepared. And so in response to that, council gave certain direction to staff to conduct the study and to make that determination whether or not there should be another EIR prepared on the issue of dewatering. Mr. Miller will explain to you the process we've gone through, which has taken over a year now, and there have been court hearings in the interim about this whole matter. But Mr. Miller explained what he concluded, what the study consisted of, and then after he's done, that we would ask that you make a determination whether or not to adopt the findings that the CLA is recommending in this report. That is an action that is required by the court. We have to take an action here, either to adopt the findings or not to. But Mr. Miller will go into the rest of the detail.
Okay. As you recall, when this came forward, Mr. Rosendahl asked for a supplemental EIR to be done. City Attorney recommended against that, citing CEQA law that had very specific conditions under which a supplemental can be required. And the council instructed us to go find out whether there is merit to the assertion that there's a problem. So the council instructed us to hire 2 peer reviewers, independent firms that had no involvement with Playa Vista, either with the city or with Playa Vista itself or with the gas company, which has a storage field just west of the Playa Vista development. The council also instructed us to hold 2 public hearings, one following the preliminary results of the peer review and the second then in response to issues that were brought up in the first hearing. Both of those hearings were held. The first hearing lasted about, I would say, about 3 hours. There were several hundred people there, and my recollection is there were something between 80 and 90 speakers at that hearing. The second hearing was also held out in the district at Loyola Marymount University, and that hearing, I would say, lasted a couple of hours. So the peer reviewers did do their study. They looked at a variety of information. They looked at the source data. They oversaw the installation of a well on the east side of the property. that the Regional Water Quality Control Board recommended be sunk to determine whether or not the contaminated plume is moving. They looked at all of those issues, and in a nutshell, their conclusion is that there is no substantive impact from dewatering on subsidence, that the most that would be expected is a half inch of subsidence, and that is not material. And the second issue they found is that the dewatering, there's no evidence that the dewatering has caused the contaminated plume on the eastern end of the property to migrate. So in essence, that is the conclusion of the peer reviewers. And again, we recommend the council proceed and make the findings that the city attorney has asked for relative to not requiring a supplemental EIR.
Thank you. I'd like to pose these questions to you as a result of Plum, and to this date, more information has come to my office. I want to raise these questions and hopefully shed some more light in this process. It's been suggested that the council note and file the CLA report and wait for the court to rule on the scope of review. Would this be appropriate?
No, it would not. First of all, the scope and the direction has been set by the trial court and the Court of Appeal. The trial court issued an order to the city telling it how to go forward. We have been in court several times since then, which was almost a year ago, and there's, in my opinion, there's no doubt in the trial court's mind about what it is that he has told the city to do. And I believe, and the court has confirmed, that what we are doing is consistent with what the trial court told us to do. And in terms of whether or not you should note and file it, the lesson from the Court of Appeal is that it requires an action by City Council to make findings whether or not a supplemental EIR is required. So the court will have something to look at so it can tell that the city actually made this determination. Therefore, if you note and file it, it wouldn't give that clear message. And that's why the findings that are couched in the terms that CEQA requires are laid out in the CLA report, and we don't think it would be sufficient if you just noted and filed that. We are recommending that you actually adopt those findings as the CLA is recommending.
Could I add just one thing to that?
Please.
And that is, at the last hearing we attended, the first thing the judge said to us was, when is this matter going to be taken up by City Council? And then one of the last things he said was that he agreed with what was happening in terms of the city process, and on page 38 of the transcript said, their interpretation agrees with mine, meaning the city. So obviously, I can't say, oh, I think you've done wrong, because they are doing what I think should be done, is making a determination as to whether or not it is a subsequent or supplemental or none at all. So the judge is most definitely looking to the City Council to take action here.
When we look at the notion of consistency, the issue arises about the scope of the review. And it's been stated that it was too narrow, the way we approached that whole process of scope of review. Could you speak to that assertion, whether
Sure.
it's too narrow?
Sure. Ever since before the writ was issued, the plaintiffs in this litigation have been saying that the way what the Court of Appeal said was to determine whether a supplemental EIR or a subsequent EIR was required, and those were the only two choices that the city had. And from the beginning, since almost a year ago, the trial court has said no, that the court has three options. It's determined whether a subsequent EIR is required, whether a supplemental EIR is required, or whether no EIR is required. And the court has said that repeatedly in transcripts that we have here. I think this was pointed out again at the Plum hearing. And the court has told us you have three choices, not two. And again, that's consistent with CEQA, because CEQA prohibits the city from requiring another EIR unless certain facts exist. And the Court of Appeal had already determined that it didn't know whether or not those facts exist. That's why we have this study.
Thank you. The concern about vent wells. Could you respond to the assertions made that these vent wells, are they an issue at this time? Are the vent wells what we are looking at, and what is the relationship to this, to what's before us today?
Well, the vent wells are the 50-foot wells, and those are not related to dewatering. Back in the original study that was done in 2000, and I think adopted by the council in 2001, it is clear that there's methane contamination on the site. it is clear that the methane gathers at the 50-foot aquifer level. And one of the creative ideas that the consultants and the Bureau of Engineering came up with to try and invent that is to sink 50-foot wells into the aquifer so that the gas, which follows a path of least resistance, rather than gather in the 50-foot level and percolate up through the soil, would vent out through the wells. That is an entirely separate issue from the dewatering issue. And also back in 2001, which the court opined on, there's a whole series of methane mitigation measures, including the barriers, the active mitigation systems, the passive mitigation systems, the alarms. Whether or not those vent wells actually did what they thought they might do, there was still the mitigation and protections for the methane contamination that was there.
So if the water table rises, the vent wells will not be essentially flooded? They're different systems, or are they the same system?
But the deep vent wells are vertical, just tubes, metal tubes. They have stones in them. They're sunk down 50 feet down into the underlying water, and the air, being lighter than water, goes up these vertical tubes and then goes out. But in terms of the dewatering devices, the dewatering are more parallel devices that are underneath the buildings. It's not a new system. It's used consistently throughout the city whenever water levels can rise, and they allow the water to passively drain down as the water rises. Those are two separate things. Those are known as the dewatering pipes. But the vent wells are entirely passive. They have no pumping. They don't do anything with the water but sit in it and allow the gas to escape up through it.
Well, these are the questions I had based on conversations I've been having since our Plum Committee, and I appreciate the answers. And I believe we'd have to take a formal action to open up the public hearing. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
So, Councilman Olson, did you want to open up the public hearing?
Yes, I would like to do
Okay,
that.
please.
Do you want to speak first, Mr. Rosendahl? Or
Just for a second,
Okay.
ask a question. What's the difference between a peer review and either a supplemental or a sequential EIR? Explain the difference in lay terms. What does that mean?
A supplemental EIR is a formal document that has rules about how it should be written and how it needs to be circulated and how long you have to allow people to comment on it. A peer review is just sort of a term of art for having experts look at a topic. There's no requirement of how you go about doing it, or whether or not you have to send it to certain agencies, or whether or not you have to write up certain findings on the peer review. It's simply a study.
And when they do the study, what data did they use to do their analysis?
Well, they used a variety of data from several reports, and in fact, the data from Group Delta Consultants, data from Camp Dresser and McGee, data from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and also any other data or reports or information that was submitted during the process.
And was that data collected when?
We may need Bureau of Engineering up here who worked with them. It was, well, some of the data, for example, on the vent well, or not the venting well, the monitoring well that was put on the east side of the property occurred last spring, and our peer reviewers oversaw that. And I think Mike Mulhern can make his way up here and talk about when some of the rest of the data was gathered. There was also, obviously, the data from the Regional Quality Control Board was again last spring and submitted during the process. In terms of the CDM and Group Delta reports.
Mike Mulhern, Bureau of Engineering. Basically, Jerry got it right. Data was looked at for many years. I didn't mean that facetiously. Jerry always gets it right. The most data was collected in a couple of dozen groundwater monitoring wells by Camp Dresser McGee over a period of several years. But both they and I have looked through the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the state agency's records back for several years, because this site has had a long history of exploration, back even when Hughes Aircraft was operating it and had tunnels underground and so on with no methane devices. So we looked at several years of old data, and also there, as Jerry mentioned, there was one new Sentinel well that the Regional Water Quality Control Board asked to have installed. This is a well between the plumes and the dewatering area to make sure that when the dewatering actually occurs, there's no movement of these plumes, and that's an extra data point. Both myself and the two expert firms witnessed the drilling of that well, the sampling, and so on. made sure it was all done to state standards.
I'm really happy to hear that. Do you feel strongly yourself as a technical fellow that a peer review analysis gives us the same amount of safety as a supplemental EIR? In your mind, is there a difference between the two? Would it be new data, fresh data? What's the difference, in your opinion, between an EIR versus the peer review?
I'm very confident and very happy with the data that we have, and very confident with the results that and the methods that CDM has used. I'm very confident with the State Regional Water Quality Control Board looking at this data. The Department of Toxic Control also looked at this data, and their branch, the OEHA, which is the Office of Environmental Human Health Assessment. All these groups have very high-level management PhD types looking at this, so I'm very confident that the data that we have and the data that we gathered, and then in particular what we did with the peer review group was take this data and regurgitate it through all the technical models. We spent most of the summer making worst-case scenarios. What happens if water is always at the highest level? What happens if more water comes off the bluffs? We kind of kept tweaking the model, getting worst-case scenario. In each case, it showed there is less than significant effect of groundwater on these various the various effects.
Did you feel comfortable that you covered enough areas, that you went to other spots? Some people have alleged certain spots weren't looked at, others needed to be looked at. It wasn't thorough enough.
I feel it was thorough enough. Again, we looked at water coming off the bluffs. We looked at water percolating through Concert Park. Tow water from the buildings was accounted for. We looked at a huge amount of data. And I feel very confident of the results.
Appreciate that. Susan, would you explain what the court actually, when it narrowly defined whatever that's supposed to mean, the dewatering issue, and how that relates to what he just said?
Well, part of this is explained in the CLA report about the scope of the review. But when the Court of Appeal looked at the evidence that was before it then, didn't have this information that we now have on dewatering. It had the methane study. And it had identified in the information that it had in front of it 2 possible issues that could arise as a result of what it believed the dewatering was. And those 2 issues were subsidence and then a possible spreading of this contaminated plume. So when council directed the studies be done over a year ago, in the motion, they directed that the studies focus on those issues because the Court of Appeal had upheld all the other issues that had been presented in the methane report. Now, that's not to say that if people presented evidence about other dewatering impacts that we would have ignored it, and it wasn't ignored because actually the CLA, some of the data and other studies had other issues having to do with the water levels and the groundwater quality and so forth. What the CLA process did not go back into was re-examining the issue of methane because we felt that that had been already upheld by the Court of Appeal and had been the subject of the original study, so we didn't study that. But the report was done to coincide with what the direction was we had gotten from the Court of Appeal. Now, ultimately, if council takes action today, we'll report back to the trial court, and the trial court will have in front of it all the evidence that has been generated, the transcripts, the hearings, everything will be in front of the trial judge, and he'll make a determination whether or not what the city did was appropriate. And if he does it one way or the other, one side's dissatisfied, they can always appeal. But at this point, we need to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. And it's the 27th of February, and what do you see as a time frame what happens next, assuming my colleagues support this and send it to the court?
Well, if council takes action today, then our office will package basically the paperwork relating to that up and submit it to the trial court. The trial court has already received a copy of this CLA report because it's anxious to see it. We've submitted a lot of the documentation that is already in the council file, and we will basically advise the trial court the city council took this action, here's the documentation it had in front of it, and then we would ask the court to make a determination that we had complied with the writ.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam President. I look forward to asking more questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have 2 other speakers. Do we want to open public comment now? Mr. Weiss and LaBonge, can we open? I think you wanted 10 minutes on both sides. Is that correct?
I would, if we can allow the council members to speak, then we can have the public hearing, then we can finish it.
Thank you. I'd rather have the public comment and then, okay. Mr. LaBonge, would you?
clarification on when you had the question about peer review. Why we're at the verge of solving the Wilshire subway situation is a peer review. A peer review is a fine way to look at things because you bring in people from around the country or around the region, and there's a lot in this region who have an idea and a knowledge and a sensibility about what they're talking about on this particular issue here. So I wanted to make that statement because why we have solved the question that stopped us from moving out Wilshire Boulevard is a peer review. Now, a peer review says this works, then that makes sense for me to feel comfortable. If the Los Angeles City Fire Department and its members say this makes sense, then I feel comfortable. But I will tell you, all that being said, when it rained like it was an open sky and all that water came into 3rd and Fairfax and flame came out of the sidewalk, we didn't actually know what to do. So I understand your concern, but I believe technology has improved greatly since that 1983 incident at 3rd and Fairfax there at the department store that still has the Don Anthony Memorial now flame up there. Thank you. 85. Thank you very much.
Mr. Reyes.
Madam President, I believe Councilmember Weiss is the last one on the speaker. If we can open public hearing, then allow him to speak last if that's what he chooses to do.
And Mr. Weisar has also pressed his button since then. Okay?
Would you mind if we-
So we'll go to the public comment now, or do you want to ask your questions, Mr. Weisar, before public comment?
I have one question. I don't think it'll take long. It may have been already
please.
covered. And I'm trying to get very clear, why wait till, what's the benefit of acting now versus waiting for after March 19th? What information will the court get today versus us getting information from the court after that? Can you...
I guess the question would be, why wait? We've been here for a year. We've had to appear in front of the court. The original date that the court had told us to make this determination was in July of 2006. We've been back to the court. Every time we go to the court, it says, when are you going to make that determination? That was the first words out of its mouth. We've been directed to make that determination on this issue. So there's no reason, we've completed our studies, there's no reason to delay. What would be the purpose of waiting?
So we're not, if the court decides, would that inform our decision on this end, on anything that we would want to move forward with?
We're asking that the council decide right now whether or not to adopt the CLA's findings that no new EIR is required.
What happens if we wait till after March 19th and allow the court to decide?
The court is waiting for us to decide.
They're waiting for us to decide?
Yes. So if we wait till the 19th, then the court will say, have you decided yet? And we'll say, no, we were waiting for you. The court's already indicated that we need to take an action before it can decide that issue.
Could I weigh in on this also, too, Councilman? I believe it's pretty clear this is not a situation where the trial court is looking to the appellate court for any direction, which is a picture some are painting. The trial court is looking first for the council to act. The trial court has made it clear at every turn that it agrees with our interpretation and the path that the city is going down. So based on that, we don't think there's going to be anything that happens on the 19th that would impact how this council moves forward.
So we don't need any, the court, do they need to clarify whether they feel the city has met the instructions of the writ or not?
They've already clarified that, and I could read multiple times in the record where the court has said to the city, or said to petitioners, we agree with the city, we disagree with you. We agree with the city, we disagree with you, and we're not going to hold the city in contempt when the city agrees with the court's interpretation. Those are the words of the judge, so we don't believe there's any benefit to waiting.
So we're not looking for any clarification from the court as to whether we've been complying with the writ or not. That's not an issue.
No, we're not.
We're not. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Grosendahl, yes, we're going to go for the pros first and the con second. Okay. So I'd like to call the following. It would be 10 minutes for each side. George Milston, Steve Donnell, Wendy McLenay, and Whitney Tipton are the first four.
Honorable Council Members, George Milston, Latham Watkins, representing Playa Capital. We are here today to request your approval of the CLA report on the issue of dewatering associated with methane systems at Phase 1 Playa Vista. I would like to take a minute and ask all the Playa Vista residents, supporters, and workers that are here today and have been here for several hours to stand both to stretch their legs and to see if they still have blood in them, and to show you that the people of the community, the people of Playa Vista, very much want this concluded. This has been a year-and-a-half-long process, and they would like to see it concluded, and we'd ask for your approval today. Thank you very much. Following a study which has lasted well over a year, the CLA is recommending to you that the council find that groundwater dewatering associated with the methane mitigation systems at Playa Vista will not cause any significant act on the environment, and there is no need for a supplemental or a subsequent EIR. Despite the comments you may hear today, there have been 4 technical studies, 4 expert reports who have now concluded there is no impact on the environment. It is clear, it is unequivocal, there is no impact associated with dewatering on either subsidence or on groundwater associated with the plume. I'd like to comment on an issue that you may hear today, which is weight. We have been in the process now a year and a half. We have been before the Superior Court now 3 times, and the court has asked, City, what is your decision? The court has made it clear that it is the city's decision in returning to the writ of what it should do here. And so it is asking for a decision from the City Council with respect to the issue of whether there is any evidence to support an environmental impact associated with groundwater dewatering with the Phase 1 methane mitigation systems, and all the evidence makes clear there is not. We urge your approval of the CLA report. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Donnell, and I live in Playa Vista. I'm not here as a developer. I'm not here as a consultant. I'm not here being paid. I'm here because I think I have probably one of the strongest vested interests of anyone, as well as my neighbors. I'm here because I live there, and it's my health and it's my safety that is at stake. And if I had any concern at all that there were any problems, I'd be the first one to stand up front and center and voice those concerns. I attended both of the recent public meetings in connection with the peer review process, along with hundreds of my neighbors. I took the time to read the studies about the issues of dewatering associated with the methane systems at Playa Vista and the final reports by the experts who found that the systems have no environmental impact. I have even had opportunities to personally meet and speak with Councilman Rosendahl regarding this specific issue. I was very surprised and dismayed, however, last week at the Plum hearing to learn that CD11 thought that the review was too legalistic and too technical to be understood. The scope of the review and the results were clear to me and obviously clear to your colleagues on the Plum Committee who voted to accept the findings. These truly are technical, narrow, and legal issues, and it is my expectation that the City of LA approaches the issue as such. The CLA has recommended that there be no subsequent or supplemental EIR. The City Attorney has stated that there is no legal basis for a subsequent or supplemental EIR. But without any facts, scientific evidence, or documentation to justify it, CD11 asked Plum to reopen the review of Playa Vista's environmental approvals. They do so despite the facts, despite the CLA's recommendation, despite the City Attorney's recommendation, and despite what CD11's constituents, now 6,000 of them in Playa Vista, have requested. At this time, I am unaware of any justification for this course of conduct, and I must say that I am very troubled by it. I respectfully request that you look at the science and you look at the law and you adopt and accept the recommendations of the CLA. Thank you.
My name is Wendy McKilney, and I'm the Executive Director for Sunrise Senior Living, located in Playa Vista. I'm here to represent the 60 seniors that are housed at Sunrise and the 100 team members that we have there. I want to thank the CLA for overseeing such a comprehensive process to evaluate the dewatering systems associated with methane mitigation at Playa Vista. I attended both city hearings last year looking at this issue. The peer reviewers hired by the city studied the issues in detail and rendered their expert opinions. They even went back and answered more questions that have been raised by the public. I have read the reports. Their findings are consistent, and I'm thrilled to know that the dewatering systems associated with methane do not have any significant environmental impacts. Thank you again for the thoroughness of the public review. I also attended the Planning and Land Use Committee last week. At that hearing, the City Attorney testified that there was no legal basis for ordering an SEIR. The CLA also testified that there was no need for an SEIR SEIR. The Superior Court judge in the underlying litigation has made it clear that you are absolutely not required to order an SEIR. Now it is time to close the book and accept these recommendations. Thank you.
My name is Whitney Tipton, and I've lived in Playa Vista for 2 years. The city has asked 2 primary questions. First, does dewatering associated with the methane systems cause subsidence? The answer, according to the reports, is no. 2, does dewatering cause mobilization of plumes in the groundwater underlying the site? The answer, again, according to the reports, is no. As you heard, Planning and Land Use Management Committee last week, the city attorney stated there is no legal basis for a subsequent or supplemental EIR. Based on the expert reports, the CLA has also recommended that there be no SEIR. The opponents here today will do anything and everything to stop Playa Vista, even if their claims are rooted in bad science and bad law. The reports in front of you were done by independent experts hired by the city. The systems at Playa Vista are more than adequate, and thanks to these city reports, we have further validation that the dewatering systems cause no environmental impacts. Thank you all for doing such a diligent job. I'm here to ask you to approve the CLA's recommendations and free your time to move on to other issues of far more importance in the city. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jones? Donald Jones? Followed by Tom Terrell and Arnold Sachs.
Good afternoon. My name is Donald Jones, and I own at Playa Vista. I want to thank you for conducting this process. As an owner at Playa Vista, I was obviously interested in what the data would reveal related to our methane mitigation systems. You asked independent experts to evaluate whether dewatering causes local subsidence and whether the dewatering will cause mobilization of plumes in the groundwater underlying Playa Vista Phase 1. Again, thank you for having the independent experts take a hard look at this. Well, they've evaluated and they've reached a consensus. There's no environmental harm from the dewatering. We've heard this from the CLA, both of whom state that there is no need for a subsequent or supplemental EIR. It is also clear that there is no legal need for you to have a subsequent or supplemental EIR. So let's stand by the data, move forward with an approval, and let's stop meeting like this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me remind you, this side has 10 minutes, and we're going to do the same for the other side. So the speakers, just keep that in consideration. There's 1.48 left on this side. Go ahead. Mr. Jones.
Thank you. I'm Tom Tyrrell. I live at Playa Vista. And I read that opinion from the Court of Appeal back October '05, so it's closing in on 18 months. No wonder the trial court's getting a little antsy about getting the answer from the City Council. The court said to check on whether dewatering required a supplemental EIR process. And figuring that out has had been predictable expense, predictable delay, but what was also predictable, not a scrap of evidence that a supplemental EIR is needed, not a scrap of evidence that dewatering is harming the environment. It's an easy one for the City Council. But this council must know by now that Playa Vista's opponents cannot be satisfied. If you act reasonably on the project, you're going against their articles of faith. And they have the advantage. Making stuff up is more exciting than the science and the facts. But the facts are so inconvenient, and I won't repeat them. Stick to the science and the facts, and you'll do your duty. Thank you.
Mr. Sachs? No, Mr. Sachs. Gilbert Fuentes? Chalice McPherson? And the final speaker on this side will be Ken Marsh, and you got 30 seconds.
Good morning. My name is Gilbert Fuentes, and I'm a resident of Walden House. This project not only helps the unfortunate, but it also our community and increases its property value. PV Jobs has afforded us the opportunity to utilize our hidden skills. Those of us who reside and participate in reentry facilities have made many bad choices and have paid for those mistakes. Projects such as Playa Vista and Gateway provide us the opportunity to learn how to be productive citizens and at the same time give us the opportunity to give back to our community. I am grateful to be a participant of this project and I support it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Shelley McPherson. I live in Venice. I've been attending these meetings for about 20 years. Don't you think it's time that we got down to better things to do? We have gangs to worry about. We have homelessness to worry about. Part of Venice is underneath the sea level. We have flooding to worry about. I think it's time we got down to business, real business. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes, we're 47 seconds over. We're going to give that to the other side. And we're now going to go with the opposite side, the opposition on this matter. And the first speaker will be Patricia, and it's hard to read their last name. Grassroots Coalition, Patricia, are you here? Is that your name, Patricia? Ma'am, your last name?
My name is Patricia McPherson.
McPherson?
I'm president of Grassroots Coalition. I'm here representing the lawsuit.
McPherson. And then the next one will be Janet Vosberg and Marcy Hansen. Go ahead, please.
Number one, I would like to reiterate that this is a regional issue. It affects Playa del Rey, Venice, Marina del Rey, and many other areas of the city. What the city attorney has just said to you, almost without exception, was false information. The appellate court fulfilled already one of the three prongs. It made the ruling already that groundwater dewatering in connection with the methane mitigation measures is a potentially substantial project change. We conclude that the permanent groundwater dewatering contemplated in connection with the methane mitigation measures adopted by the city is a potentially substantial project change because it could result in those new or substantially more severe significant impacts. The court is not asking the city to remake this decision. The court is asking the city to determine whether to do a supplemental or subsequent. Ms. Phan told you an absolute falsehood. The lower court has agreed with Atina that we are, with the lower court, in disagreement with regard to whether it's going to be an SEIR, or an addendum. However, the lower court has stated we need to take this up for clarification to the appellate court. That's going on right now. Furthermore, Ms. Phan told you falsehood when she said that the lower court was agreement with the scope of review. And I'll quote to you part of it. The appellate court has a different understanding of what it is because, in fact, if all dewatering is or at near the surface, they wouldn't have considered the subsidence. You're going to have to explain it all. That's where we are in court. The lower court is not fidgeting. The lower court is not saying, let's hurry this process along. If anything, the lower court is dragging it out and has agreed that we need clarification from the appellate court as to the scope of review, all of the language of all of this, that it's asking for guidance from the appellate court.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please. You've got a total of 10 minutes for all the speakers, and if you take all the time, they won't have an opportunity to speak.
I'll see. We eliminate one of the other speakers and give her another 2 minutes.
If they're willing to do that.
It's not a problem.
Right. Well, go ahead and say your thing, and then I will, because I want to look at this.
No, you're still, if you're going to give you the time.
2 more minutes. Thank you.
The lower court has already asked, Ms. Phan knows full well that the lower court has asked you to bring in this CLA report in order to determine if it has complied with the writ. If it has complied with the writ, if it has complied with the writ. The lower court in no way agrees with the city on these issues. and the lower court agrees that we must take all of these issues up to the appellate court for clarification of this entire process. Right now, Ms. Phan is telling you what we have already considered to be contempt of court. That is what is in the courts right now. And to do anything further, to vacate the approval of the motion that this city filed, vacating the approval of the methane mitigation measures, will put the city in further contempt of court. Now, do you want to risk that? There you are. However, all of this is before the courts. Yes, this is a very legal issue, and we are dealing with it in the courts. For me to stand here and take 2 minutes while these people sit up here and tell you other things, obviously we need the court system to sort all of this out, because it's not happening here, and you are not asking me questions as you are asking them. I can refute each and everything each and every one of these people says. In fact, even from Mr. Mulhern, from 2001, we have a letter from the Department of BOE that states we do not accept any responsibility for the methane mitigation measures and the gas issues. Have they ever changed that? Why isn't this in the hands of Building and Safety? Because all of the records of Building and Safety have not been reviewed in this CLA process whatsoever. We have a hand-picked set of buildings given to you by Playa Capital for Mr. Mulhern to review, for these two companies to review. This in no way is a CEQA review of the fullest environmental extent of this site that includes the record, the entire record, in light of the whole record. That is CEQA. This is not what's happening here. Right now, this is kangaroo. And Susan Phan is absolutely telling you nothing but falsehoods.
Next speaker, please.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, or good morning.
It's almost good evening.
I'm Jeanette Vosberg, and I'd like to state that this motion isn't just about Playa Vista. This affects all the people in the coastal zone. Our letters supporting Bill Rosenthal's request for an SEIR represents hundreds of people. All of us who live in the area have to deal with these gas hazards in this region. Why, if Playa Capital believes the project is safe, have they failed to sign a waiver of liability to absolve the taxpayers of LA in the event of a disaster resulting from their development? The Chief Legislative Analyst's report is narrow and inadequate, as Bill Rosenthal's letter said. It's no substitute for CEQA. Why does Playa Vista fear this if they build a safe development? Why does the CLA report contain a model of dewatering when there's a Department of Sanitation metering for the Playa Vista site? Why isn't this metering information for all of the buildings, which way exceed 5 buildings? I counted over 25. Why isn't the data from the Department of Sanitation metering being used to establish how much water there really is there? I did some numbers, and unless there's something way wrong with my numbers, just one building was creating 432,000 gallons of water a day. Now, I'm fairly good at math. Perhaps I've made a mistake, but it's 200 gallons per minute. I'd just like to ask to defer this, to defer it and let the Superior Court rule, or let the appellate court rule as Judge Wu from the Superior Court has asked.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Honorable Council Members, Marcia Hanscom with the Wetlands Action Network and with California Clean. I delivered to each of your offices yesterday an actual copy of the court decision. I hope you've had the chance to read it, because the interpretation the City Attorney's Office has given you does not reflect what's in this opinion. The most important part, perhaps, for this discussion is the last part where it says, "and proceed accordingly as required by CEQA." That's the California Environmental Quality Act. You don't have the proper city experts in front of you here today to determine that. If you had Gail Goldberg, your planning director, who's an expert at CEQA, perhaps she could tell you. What do they do first when they comply with CEQA? They make a checklist. No checklist has been made. They register it with the state clearinghouse. No registration has been made. you at least determine, if you aren't going to decide whether a subsequent or supplemental EIR is required, which the court has clearly said, you at least have to say that it's a categorical exemption or a mitigated negative declaration. I know you know what that is because it's on your agenda today for several other issues, categorical exemption. None of that has happened here. You also have not notified the agencies. Why is this important? Immediately adjacent to this property is the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve, 620 acres now owned by the state of California. Neither the Fish and Game Department nor the State Lands Commission, who own this land, have been notified, have been asked their opinion. What happens when you take all of this water out of the ground? How is it impacting the wetlands? How is it impacting the Ballona Creek area? How is it impacting all of these issues? You don't know. None of us know because that wasn't asked for. That's part of why the court asked that CEQA be followed. CEQA has not been followed. You cannot approve these findings legally unless CEQA is followed. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
My name is Daniel Cohen. I'm with the Grassroots Coalition. And I would just like to hold up all these emails that have come in, people supporting Councilman Rosenthal in his ask to have CEQA followed, to do either a subsequent or a supplemental EIR and obey the court order. Since this court order was put in place more than a year ago, asking the city to vacate the approvals of methane mitigation system, which you did, the methane mitigation system is still out and running. The pumps are running, the methane detectors are running. The court instructed the city to vacate its approvals. Why is the system still on? Why is Building and Safety issuing building permits to build methane systems? Why is the construction going on? You instructed Building and Safety to vacate the approval on the methane mitigation system. They're still building methane mitigation systems. They are in contempt of court. The lower court is wavering and dragging their feet, but you can believe me, we're going back to the appellate court so they can reinforce their order and find out why the city is in contempt of court, why the developer is in contempt of court. Why do they keep digging the city a larger and larger hole? What CEQA process was followed here? The court said proceed according to CEQA. It didn't say do a CLA report. The CLA does not stand for CEQA. We have to follow the law. And I would ask the City Council to follow the law. And you guys need to get a new attorney, because this one that you've got sitting up here, Susan Fan, lies and lies and lies. You need separate counsel. You need someone that'll tell you the truth. She got you into a lawsuit, she lost a lawsuit, and now she's not following the court order. She's not got a good batting average.
Mr. President, have him direct the questions to you and not attack city staff, please.
Thank you. I think our city attorney was going to make that comment. We have Paul Herzog, Kathy Knight, Amanda Koch, Dan Cohen, and Zuma Dog, and there's 46 seconds over, and I think that was the time that we had allocated. So we're going to put these cards in for the remainder, and Mr. Clerk, or City Attorney, will proceed. We have a public. We're now with council members. Mr. Weiss, Mr. Reyes, Mr. Labange. Mr. Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Fan, let me ask you a couple questions. Please hold my time during the questions, Mr. President.
Yes.
You heard discussion during public comment about the court's order, and then I've heard discussion from you and Mr. McWilliams about statements the court made that you have on the transcript of various hearings. I'd like you to walk us through that again and conclude by telling me, is there any ambiguity in what the court has ordered the city to do?
In terms of the issue about whether the court wants the city to act, and then it will make a decision on whether we have fulfilled our responsibilities. I'll read you from the transcript. Starting out, Mr. Fine, who is the attorney for petitioners, addressing the court, well, with all due respect, the court, let me stop you. Again, I think this point has been discussed sufficiently. Again, It really will depend upon what the report will say in this regard, and I will wait until the report comes out. And then, at that point in time, I will take a look at it. And the report that the court was referring to, and this was a couple of weeks ago, is the CLA report. So clearly the court wants to have the CLA or the City Council to take an action, and then it will look at it. Now, we don't know what the court will rule in terms of whether or not we've studied this adequately. We believe that the court will say that we have. But until the court actually looks at all the evidence, the court will have to decide that.
And I have a slightly different question for you, which is, I understand there is some notion, there's some contention being made out there that courts look at reports and make decisions based on them. I'm just not familiar with that concept in the land use or the CEQA concept. I'm familiar with government agencies making decisions and courts then reviewing those decisions. That's indeed what we are here to do. Can you enlighten me on that point?
That's exactly what's supposed to be happening here. The City Council will make a decision based on the evidence in front of it, and then the court will look at the City Council's decision and see if it's supported by the evidence.
And all parties to litigation will have the opportunity in front of the Superior Court to contest, should they, the government agency's action here, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So it's not as if by taking an action today, we take away the opportunity of the litigants to litigate their positions in court, correct?
That's right. They will just have something finite to be litigating. They will have your action and the court's reaction to it.
Okay. On the earlier issue of the court's written order, where the court ordered the city to decide whether a supplemental or subsequent EIR was warranted, there has been discussion about whether that was ambiguous, and I believe the court has made declarative statements about that clause on the record. Can you enlighten us as to that?
That's right, and I have the transcript right in front of me, and this again was on January 18th. Mr. Fine, who was the plaintiff's attorney, was saying that the appellate court said to them, in other words the city, that they were required to go for and do either a supplemental or a subsequent EIR. The court, that's absolutely wrong, Mr. Fine. Well, the court, that is absolutely wrong, because the appellate court makes it clear that they are supposed to determine whether a subsequent EIR or a supplemental EIR is required. In other words, they can choose either to go subsequent, they can either choose to go supplement, or they can choose to do neither. That's three choices there, not two. And that was what the trial court said.
Is there any ambiguity in your mind as to that court's order?
No, I think the court has made that point clear on a number of occasions.
And is it crystal clear to you that the process the council has filed by directing Mr. Miller to do what he has done complies with the court's order?
Yes, I believe it has. The process was actually more than the court ordered.
And could you advise us today to not take an action, to note and file this report, and basically just shirk our responsibilities and leave it up to the court? Is that something you could conceivably advise us to do?
Well, I would not advise you to shirk your responsibilities. And as I indicated earlier, we have had a writ issued against us to make this determination.
What does that mean, we've had a writ issued against us?
The Court of Appeal issued the writ telling the City Council...
Ordering.
Ordering. It's an order.
Keep going.
Right. To set aside, to vacate its approval of the methane mitigation measures for the purpose of determining whether a supplemental or a subsequent EIR is required for dewatering. And so it's the purpose is that they have directed the city to do is to make that determination whether that is required. And that's what we would need to report back to the court.
Your co-counsel wants to add.
Well, I would just add one on the question of whether or not these proceedings should be delayed or postponed until some other action happens in trial court. There's another portion of the transcript. There's another portion of the transcript on page 22 where I think the judge is clearly saying he doesn't want the city to wait and that he's expecting a decision. Starting at line 24, he says, "It might very well be that the report is done by the CLA is going to make a determination that, one, yes, it is dangerous, in which case we cannot do dewatering, we have to do something else, in which case they are going to decide what they are going to need to do, or they are going to make a decision saying it's not dangerous. If it's not dangerous, then it's not dangerous." He uses the word decision twice, so he's expecting a decision one way or the other.
Mr. Miller, do you make decisions or do you make recommendations to this council?
I make recommendations to the council.
And what is your recommendation today?
That you find that there is no substantive impact from the dewatering on the methane mitigation systems or the plume, and that you not require a supplemental EIR.
Are there any factual ambiguities or loose ends in the studies that were conducted under your watch over the last year?
No.
Was the process that you initiated at our direction independent?
Absolutely.
Describe the manner in which it was independent.
We hired two firms, experts in geotechnical consulting, engineers. Neither firm had any relationship whatsoever relative to Playa Vista with the city, with Playa Vista, and also with the Southern California Gas Company. One of the earliest claims back in 2000 was that the gas storage facility to the west of the development was a hazard. So it was determined that we would hire somebody that had no relationship with any of those parties to do the review.
Ms. Phan and Mr. McWilliams, there has been much discussion about whether the city ought to order some sort of supplemental environmental review under CEQA. Does CEQA set out a specific test that must be made in situations such as the instant matter that have to be satisfied, test that has to be satisfied before a government can order the production of a supplemental or subsequent EIR?
Yes, it does.
Tell us about that test.
It's contained in State CEQA Guidelines, Section 15162, and was paraphrased in the CLA report at Section 6. And this is the situation once an EIR has been certified for a project.
And is that the situation in the instant
That's the situation here because City Council certified an EIR in 1994 when it approved the Playa Vista project, and then it recertified it again, I think in 1995, when there was some modification. So we have a certified EIR. So the question is, do you have to do an additional EIR of any sort? And what CEQA requires is that one of these things happen, either that substantial changes are proposed in the project, which would require major revisions of the existing EIR, or substantial changes occur in the circumstances under which the project is undertaken, which require major revisions in the EIR, or new information which was not and could not have been known at the time of the existing EIR becomes available. And then in addition to that, if there is such information or changes, substantial evidence must show that the project will have new significant effects on the environment, or that existing significant effects will be substantially more severe, or considerably different or previously found infeasible mitigation measures would substantially reduce impacts, but project proponents refuse to implement those measures. So those are the findings that the city would have to make, and those findings would have to be based on evidence before the city would have the authority under CEQA to require a subsequent EIR.
And is that test is that discretionary whether we apply that test or not, or is that mandatory? Is that in fact the law of the state of California?
That is the law. It's contained in the California Code of Regulations. The only determination the council has to make is how the facts in front of it meet that test, because you have to have substantial evidence to support your conclusions, regardless of what they are.
Okay. Have any facts arisen during the course of this last year peer review investigation process that meet any of those prongs of that, any of the prongs of that test?
No facts have arisen that suggest that there is a substantial impact from the dewatering, so no.
Is that conclusion of yours, Mr. Miller, clear, or is there any ambiguity in your mind?
That conclusion is clear. There is no ambiguity in my mind on that.
Ms. Phan?
I agree.
Okay. Finally, Ms. Phan and Mr. Miller, what facts hypothetically what would the facts have to look like for you to have a different conclusion that a supplemental or subsequent EIR, in fact, would be warranted? What sort of facts would have to have come out for you to have reached a different conclusion?
Well, if, for example, the dewatering, which is required for the foundations and some of the buildings over there, if that dewatering resulted in substantial subsidence, if the ground was going to drop by a foot, and that dropping of the ground could cause the methane systems to malfunction, or I would even broaden it to say that if there were any evidence that a problem with building foundations, etc., then I would come before you and say there is a substantial impact. You need to require a supplemental EIR. Conversely, if that well that was drilled in the eastern part of the property showed that that plume, because of the dewatering, was moving quickly and moving to the west under the residence, I would say to you, I believe that you should require a supplemental EIR. Neither of those things occurred.
Ms. Fenn, any thoughts on that, or do you concur in that?
Those are examples of the type of evidence that we could argue would support an EIR. But absent that, we wouldn't have an argument to make.
Thank you. Colleagues, I want to thank Mr. Miller for working as hard as he did on this over the course of the past year. Colleagues, there are lots of matters in our lives here where I understand the desire and need of a body to work as collegially as possible and act with deference to people who know a certain area better than others. We have to do that, and we try to do that. But what we have before us today is a matter where we are compelled to act as a government agency by the facts and the law. And that is ultimately our real and most important obligation as elected officials in this city. We have to comply with the facts and the law, and I have detected no ambiguity or lack of clarity in what Ms. Phan or Mr. Miller have told us today.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Mr. Labange, Mr. Rosendahl, and Mr. Reyes. Mr. Rosendahl. Mr. Reyes, you're back on again? Okay, Mr. Rosendahl.
Thank you, Mr. President. 1994 and 1995 is when a lot of this data, a lot of the issues were dealt before, and there was an EIR. Is that right?
The EIR was in 94 and 95. The data has been since then.
And none of us, I think, were on this council during that period. Is that right?
I don't think so, no.
Right. Okay, I came on a little less than 2 years ago, and 6 months into being there, all I asked for was fresh eyes, fresh look. Let's put this thing behind us so that we can move forward. Being a layman at this, I'm not a certified environmentalist, nor am I an attorney. What's the big deal with doing a supplemental EIR?
There's no factual basis for it.
Well, who cares? I mean, the facts of the idea that the safety of the constituent. Look, our number one responsibility is the safety of our constituents, okay? That's number one. On my watch, I don't want to see anything happen to my constituents other than good things. I'm confused enough to say I don't understand why a supplemental EIR, which might put this issue to bed, wasn't done in the last 13 months when we had all the time from last January to do it. Explain again, just from a safety standpoint. That's what I care about, is the safety of my people.
From a legal standpoint, I'm a layperson as well. I'm not an expert in science.
Sure.
From a legal standpoint, which I am an expert in, CEQA prohibits the council from requiring a subsequent or a supplemental EIR unless facts exist to support it. And that was the basis for advice not to do a supplemental or a subsequent EIR unless you could make a factual determination that the standards have been met.
Fair enough. You're the lawyer. Is there anybody here that represents the safety issues that can help us through that so I can be comfortable? Can you help us with that?
I think all I can say to that is that because the city attorney advised that under the law there is not a factual basis for the council to require a supplemental EIR, my staff and I over the last year I believe have worked very, very hard to make sure that these issues were looked at, certainly under your direction and leadership. Those two lively public hearings we held out there that lasted many hours, I think that we really have gone to an extraordinary length to identify any issues that are out there that could suggest that there's a safety problem here. and really have been over backwards to try and determine whether or not there is any evidence to do that supplemental EIR. And I think the results of that study over the last year show that there just simply is not.
In conclusion, it's just a basic, simple thing. I still believe it would let us all sleep at night knowing that it was totally safe. I agree with Tom LaBonge. In 1985, we had the Fairfax explosion. That's still in my mind. This is a very interesting piece of property over there. It does have Edison right next door with one of its suppressed holding areas for its gas. And we know that this is a wetlands that has the ability to spout out methane gas. And now we have 6,000 people living there. Here we are with a lot of people here in the audience. And I say to everybody who's a resident of Playa Vista, number one, I want you to have a great quality of life. I like the mixed use. I like the interaction. I want to see an amenity package that ends up with a supermarket and a lot of these other things there that make it absolutely a place to go and not drive around and go to other places. But it's your safety that I care about. I am not comfortable that we have maybe adequately done it legally, as my esteemed colleague did legally, but it's a safety issue, and let's hope that it is safe, because I don't have the votes around the council to move forward with it, but I'm going to stay strong on this until I'm comfortable and you're all comfortable that it is safe. It's still an issue for me. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. You're welcome. Mr. LaBonge.
Mr. Rosen, I just want to say on safety, because all of us, we're Los Angeles City Council members. All of Los Angeles. This is in Los Angeles. And I feel your passion for this and your hard work here. You know, when you mentioned when this all started here, I was just a little staffer. Not little. I was just a staffer running around. And, you know, you hear people in the fight and all that stuff. But what I do now, okay, is I say to the fire department, the Fire Prevention Bureau, meet me out there. Walk me through it. And I tell Playa Vista, walk with me. And if anyone who's questioning it, have them join with you. And if they bring something up in the field, then come back to us. I think we only have the guidelines that we could deal with on this issue. As I get, every time, we put a crosswalk in on Hyperion Avenue for safety. Someone was killed in the crosswalk. And I feel bad about that crosswalk and any crosswalk in the city where someone is injured. But in talking to our leadership in the DOT, they tell us often that happens when you have an intersection. And I feel, because there's an accident. I know you feel bad. There may be something that would happen out there. I feel bad, but I have belief in what our departments are to do. We have belief in what the independent peer group would do. And I would only say to you, call them together one day and walk out. If there was an event, what would we do and how to find it? And I thank you, and I appreciate your passion, and I certainly appreciate your leadership as a great councilman of the 11th District. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal, you're back up again.
Just a quick second. If Building and Safety and the Fire Department and the environmentalists that were brought in were to stand there besides the lawyers who were talking in legalese, which I'm not a lawyer about, and gave me that comfort that it was safe, I wouldn't be standing here at this particular position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. And to close, Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Council President. I do want to thank my colleagues for this vigorous debate. I do have one question, and then I'll move the Plum Committee report. When they made reference to building and safety, whether building and safety looked at the data and how it was analyzed, the consultants that we hired, the objective consultants, given that neither of them have a history with any party involved with this case, did we engage building and safety, or to what degree did we engage the fire department? I mean, can we speak to that in terms of how our consultants work with the city family in regards to the safety issue?
Well, we certainly did engage building and safety. But again, we're talking about a dewatering issue here. And as I think I've mentioned before, there was a whole panoply of issues that were dealt with back in 2000. Fire Department, Building and Safety, OEHA, the Water Board, state agencies. There was extensive involvement by everyone. On this narrow issue, this really isn't a fire department issue.
It is not.
It is not. This is a building and safety issue, and yes, they were engaged. Okay. They were working with Mike and his staff, and they were looking at whether there were in fact impacts and whether they needed to be concerned about the design of the methane mitigation systems if there was subsidence evidence there.
Okay, thank you. I believe between all the skills and talents in this council and the questions and the debate, I feel comfortable moving the Plum report, the recommendations, which are the following. Find that the substantial evidence submitted to city shows, and it goes to recommendations 1, 2, and 3. I'll spare you the verbiage, but that's the recommendations that are set before you. Madam Attorney, do you feel that we need to articulate each point, or can we just say the recommendations before us?
If you adopt the recommendations as they're shown in the CLA report, that should be clear.
Okay. In the Plum Committee.
And the Plum report as well.
Right. So that would be the action of this body. That would be the recommendation from Plum Committee to move the recommendations. That's stated in Plum Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Okay, the matter is now before us. Open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
12 ayes, 1 no.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, please.
Item 25 was called special by Councilmember Weezer.
Item number 25. And who'd call that special?
Mr. Weezer did.
Mr. Weezer, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
There's a lot of background noise, so Sergeant Arms, if you could clear the chambers so we can resume the council meeting. We appreciate your quiet departure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, this is a street closure that was initiated or started a few months back. We have just been informed that this may affect access to an existing elementary school and to a new high school under construction in the community. I'm asking if we could have this item sent back to committee for further discussion and deliberation to discuss the potential consequences of shutting this street down for this time. So I'd like to move that this item be sent back to Public Works Committee for further consideration, Mr. President.
A second on that? Second by Ms. Hahn.
Thank you. Somebody's here for me.
I'll open the roll on that. Unanimous? Thank you. Sent back to committee.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
Item 31 was called special for cards from the public.
Item 31. And I don't have any cards. Oh, there we go. Mr. Zumadog. Item number 31.
Yes, thank you. My name's Zumadog. As you know, I just got done doing an article on LA Weekly about SCAG. Housing, big density, big issue with me. I think this is something good I'd like to bring to attention. The fact that this is going to put in an interim regulation prohibiting the creation of lots less than 9,000 square feet for building permits. So it sounds like they're going to try to maybe do something to allow some building to come into play here. So anyway, am I correct in saying this is going to be able to prevent housing from sneaking on in under the requirement of 9,000? Is that, Councilmember Smith, you know about this stuff, right? Okay, we need more of this because we got density issues here with housing, and the infrastructures cannot accommodate the roads, the streets, the schools, the fire, the police, the trash, the waste, and the many other infrastructure externalities. So I'd just like to say I'm very glad, City Council, that you are imposing this ban, interim regulation prohibiting lots less than 9,000 square feet, because it's just a way that you try to squeeze it on in there, y'all, to do density where you shouldn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zumadog. This item is now before us. Madam Clerk, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the votes.
13 ayes.
Next item.
Item 32 was called special for cards from the public.
Yes, Mr. Zumadog.
Okay, again here, I believe this is, yes, and everything I talk about is going to be about density. Land use, oh, Oh, zone change. Oh, here's the problem, y'all. You're getting a lot of these zone changes here. I don't like when I see zone changes because that means that you're going to be building things you're not supposed to. Oh, this looks like a nightmare. I'm begging you to say no on this. All kinds of zone changes for city planning. You're trying to bamboozle the constituents by adding high density where you're not supposed to. You don't got the infrastructure. You got to watch these zone changing things. My brain's fried. My hash brownie's worn off. It's gone way too long. But I'd just like to say I'm begging you. I'm begging you. The city is in crisis. The infrastructure cannot accommodate all these high-density projects that you keep on changing the zones to accommodate. You know what? 5, 10 years from now, 15, this is your legacy, you guys. I'm serious. We're stuck with very bad traffic right now. You know the highway. We're stuck with these traffic problems. It ain't going to change. So your decisions now will be affecting the next 5, 10, 15 years. I'm begging you. I'm begging you. No more high density. The city's maxed out. It would be nice if we could afford to continue to just build these density structures and make it like New York City and just keep making the city higher and higher and building more things. But there's nowhere to, where do we put the trash? Where do we put the waste? The police can't handle it. The libraries, the fire departments, all these things. So it'd be nice to be able to keep building more and more housing and just keep packing them on in. And I don't see why the city of Los Angeles has to. I ran out of stuff to say, y'all, but you didn't start the clock.
I was going to say, he did not start the clock, but we're being very generous today, Mr.
I said what I had to
Zumadog.
say, y'all, but seriously, please, there's too much density. The infrastructures can't accommodate. I live in Ventura County. I don't care, but you're messing up the whole region. So do something about it, y'all. Vote no on this.
Thank you, Mr. Zumadog. Don't go too far, because your next item, you are the sole card. Madam Clerk, open the roll on item number 30. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Cardenas, I apologize.
2 points I'd just like to clarify, since we had a member of the public talk about density and how this project may be too dense or what have you. The bottom line is, based on the fact that this property could have gone R3, they could have had as much as 240 plus units on this property. The fact of the matter is, it is less than 85 units. So the density has been seriously considered. There have been public meetings in the community, and this is a very, very good compromise where the developer definitely is not getting the best deal that they may have wanted to get. This is a compromise of unit density that is very, very low compared to what most people who want to maximize their dollars in a community would ever want. Secondly, I called this special because there was a technical amendment. That amendment has been passed out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cardenas. Madam Clerk, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the votes.
13 ayes.
That item has been approved. Next item?
Item 36 called special for a card from the public.
Yes, Mr. Zumadog? I think you have 1 minute on your 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much, Councilmember Cardenas, for responding to that. I use these opportunities to address the density in general, and so thank you for clarifying. I'm sure the community thanks you for sticking up. Right now, 36, we got a lot. Okay, I've been seeing a lot of dedicating land for public street purposes. There's 15 different dedications of land on this agenda, and then the other day, a lot of land dedication. What that does, if I'm not mistaken, is it paves the way for more high-density projects. Every time you see street dedications, I believe that's the developer that has to dedicate some land for sidewalks and things that will allow high-density building projects. And again, maybe if you want to clarify, but I've been coming here 11 months only, and I'm seeing a lot of these dedications come through here. So anytime I see a lot of things starting to flow through the agendas, then it raises some flags. So I hope we're not just allowing way too much more density. I'm begging you, this is your legacy. The time is now. Be like Tony Robbins and do something now so that in 5, 10, 15 years, we're not stuck in 80 billion times work traffic. Now's the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zumadog. Madam Clerk, if you could open the roll on item number 36, close the roll, tabulate the votes.
13 ayes.
13 ayes. That item has been approved. Next order of business, Mr. Clerk.
Madam President, does council wish to reconsider items 9 and 10? There were only 10 members at the time, and they're both ordinances.
Yes, so let's vote for reconsideration. Madam Clerk, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the votes.
13 ayes.
Those items are now before us, item 9 and 10. Madam Clerk, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the votes.
13 ayes.
That item's been approved. Now, those items, forthwith, did we hear forthwith? On number 9, forthwith on item 9. Mr. Clerk.
And that does leave the closed session items.
Okay. I think due to the closed session items, we will now clear the chambers for executive session and ask the guards to do so. Thank you. We're back in live session. Mr. Reyes.
Madam President, I just wanted to suggest to my colleagues that maybe we should start as soon as this is over. I was going to ask for 10 or 15 minutes, but maybe we just start as soon as we're over, get that going.
For the Plum Committee.
Yes, please.
Anyone
The joint-
listening, the joint meeting that will be happening, HCD and Plum. Mr. Clerk, items we had in executive session?
On item 54, there's a recommendation for settlement in the amount of $600,000 in the case of Martha Rivera versus City of Los Angeles.
Madam Clerk, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the votes.
12 ayes.
Next item.
On item 55, there's a recommendation for settlement in the amount of $1,375,000 in the case of Weinberger versus City of LA.
Madam, Ms. Hahn, did you push your button? No? Okay. Madam Clerk, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
That item's been approved. Now, we'd like to ask for forthwith on items 22, 27, and 34. Being no objections, those will go forthwith. Mr. Clerk.
Council has motions for posting and referral.
Those will be posted and referred.
Desk is clear.
Desk is clear. Do we have announcements today? Ms. Hahn.
That we're taking our city council meeting to Wilmington tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. We're going to be meeting at Banning's Landing in Wilmington, 10 a.m. So we invite everyone who's in the area down there in the harbor area to please join us for a city council meeting live in Wilmington.
City Hall.
Thank you. Ms. Hahn, any other announcements?
we will.
Mr. Parks.
Just want to announce that we're having the grand opening of the Van Ness Recreation Center Gymnasium, and we naming it in honor of Johnny Cochran on March the 3rd, Saturday, 11:30. The mayor will be there and all of the Cochran family. And also just like to announce that at the African American Museum, the Bernard and Shirley Kinsey Personal Treasures display will be in session through March the 11th, and also the South Central People and Places photo exhibit will be in place through April 28th.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Any other announcements? Adjourning motions? Yes. If I could ask everyone to please rise. Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you, Council President. With great sadness, I announce the passing of Francine Lazar on February 17, 2007. She passed away from complications associated with leukemia. Francine was born in 1986, the daughter of Joanne and Stuart Lazar. She received an associate's degree from Lincoln College in Lincoln, Illinois, and hoped to become a special education teacher. She was recently engaged to marry Elias Perez. Francine will be remembered as a loving daughter, sister, and fiancée. She will be missed by all whose lives she's touched. Francine Lazar was laid to rest on February 24, 2007. She is survived by her parents, Joanne and Stuart Lazar, two brothers, BJ and Richard, two sisters, Catherine and Rosalind, and her fiancé, Elias Perez.
Thank you. Ms. Hahn.
Thank you.
Also with sadness that I'm asking us to adjourn in the memory of the brother of one of my former staff members, Sergio Carrillo. His brother Sam died last Sunday at the young age of 37 with all of his family members at his side. Sam was born in 1970 in Harbor City to Robert and Josephina Largo. He was the third of 5 children. He grew up in Wilmington, where he attended Fries Avenue Elementary School, Wilmington Junior High School, and Banning High School, graduating in 1988. Sam attended UC Berkeley and San Francisco State Universities, earning a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, the first in his family to earn a baccalaureate degree. Upon his graduation, Sam remained in the San Francisco Bay Area working for two nonprofit organizations, Hermanos Unidos and the Seneca Center for Children and Families. As a young child, Sam loved gymnastics. In high school, he played in the Banning High School Marching Band, where he was a member of their much-beloved drum line. He's survived by his father, Robert Largo, his mother, Josefina Carrillo, a loving stepfather, Sergio Carrillo Sr., his brothers, David, Bobby, Sergio, and Richard, nieces, Jennifer and Leslie, and hundreds of uncles, aunts, cousins, and friends. He will be greatly missed by certainly his family and the whole community of Wilmington.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Mr. Labange.
Members, I ask we adjourn in memory of Lamar Lundy, a great Ram, a member of the foursome, number 85, first African-American to receive a scholarship to Purdue University, #1 pick by the Rams, and a great human being. He suffered last several years in ill health. He survived by 5 children. I ask we adjourn in memory of Lamar Lundy.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Mr. Zine.
Don Leahy passed away February 2nd. Don Leahy, a longtime resident of Canoga Park, passed away Saturday, February 24th, at the age of 79. Was born in Seattle, Washington, August 15, 1927. Graduated from West Point in 1951. Mr. Leahy served in the Korean-Vietnam Wars. After 23 years of service in the military, he retired in 1974. Worked as a realtor with Coldwell Banker in Canoga Park, and later served as a member of the Canoga Park Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Leahy will be remembered for his service and support to the community, survived by his wife Sarah and 6 children, Donald, Keith, John, Mark, Paul, and Kevin. May Don Leahy rest in peace.
Thank you, Mr. Zine. Any other adjourning motions? If not, Mr. Clerk, call the roll. This meeting is adjourned.